Ladies and gentlemen, recorded in Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada. It's time for Fight Night Picks with your hosts, Craig and Matt Allen.
Big time card coming up this weekend, UFC 256 from Glendale, Arizona. How crazy is that? That from the Sun Devil State, we have another huge card coming at you. 3 big fights, all of them 5-rounders, and we've never seen that before. We've never seen a fight that's not a co-main event or a main event as 5 rounds. It's not for a title. You have Nate Diaz taking on Leon Edwards. Deiveson Figueiredo, Brandon Moreno, the rematch. You have a rematch in the main event. And listen, Matt, the first time we had this fight, it was actually at the Gila River Arena between these two guys in Arizona. Adesanya taking on Marvin Vettori. As always, one half of your hosting duo, Craig Allen. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Craig Allen FNP. With me to my left, to your right, Matt Allen. You can find him on the respective socials at Matt Allen FNP. And Matt, last weekend, big card. I was able to kind of leapfrog a little bit, 9-3 overall. Just
still
going hot and heavy with some of those underdogs. A lot of people were doubting it, but hey, we are where we are. And I'm really looking forward to this week. We have a great card, 14 total fights. How can you not be excited for this one?
There's a lot of fights on this card, but the good news is there are 14 fights that you can get excited about. And I know you would only touch on the top 3 fights, but Drew Dober and Brad Riddell's on this card. We haven't even mentioned that yet. You have the rematch, Eric Anders, Darren Stewart. A lot of rematches on this card, oddly enough, but I could not be more excited for this weekend's UFC 263.
All sorts of great fights coming up, and yeah, that undercard, you can't sleep on anything there. So let's throw it on over to our Fight of the Night screen, which is always presented by Manscaped. And when we're talking about possible fight of the night, last weekend, Ponzinibbio Baeza, absolutely insane. It was a fight of the year contender. This weekend, we have a rematch in a fight that ended in a draw at the tail end of last year. Now, it was a short notice fight for Brandon Moreno. It was a short notice fight for Deiveson Figueiredo as well, who had just demolished Team Oyama's Alex Perez. Wow. I mean, what an awesome fight the first one was. How could the second fight just not deliver? I'm really looking forward to this one.
If it's really nice, why not do it twice? I mean, Deiveson Figueiredo, Brandon Moreno arguably could have been Fight of the Year last year, so why could we not nominate it for Fight of the Night this weekend? I could not be more excited for this rematch. Their first fight, not only close, so competitive, so back and forth too. I am so excited for this title fight.
And there's so many different fights to choose from on this card. I always throw it out there in the community tab. Make sure you're checking that out, but I usually throw it up to a poll. Movsar Evloev and Hakeem Dawodu. I mean, Matt, this is one of those personal favorites because I've really been riding the train of Evloev coming into the UFC from M1 Global, former bantamweight champ there. But for me and Hakeem, this is a guy that people knew from the World Series days and really just had that one stumbling block in his debut against Danny Henry. He's looked great since. Now, I know there's a lot of decision wins, and among them, the 4 that he's had in his 5-fight win streak, 3 of them are by split, including his last against Zubaira Tukhugov, but still, wow, and this is a possible clash of styles, too.
This should be a really fun fight because you're kind of dealing with 2 dark horses in the same division. It's not often that you get 2 guys kind of in the same portion of their career facing off against each other. You have a lot of prospects fighting older fighters or, you know, other top-ranked guys fighting other top-ranked guys. It is really nice to see the UFC put 2 top prospects in there against each other, and I think this fight's going to absolutely deliver.
Absolutely loving it. Featherweight is really banging these days, so can't wait for those 2 fights, and we have a huge card coming up. So UFC 263 coming up this Saturday, and Matt, we're about 500 subscribers, give or take, from our goal of reaching 25,000, and we've got something big planned for the end of this week, because Matt, I know a lot of people, they're hot and heavy about the UFC's trading card industry, and while the prices are absolutely insane, I went out and picked up a box of UFC Striking Signatures 2020, the Topps edition. I'm a big Topps guy, I like Upper Deck too. But Matt, I've got a little bit of a trick up my sleeve. Now listen, again, I'm not rich. We don't do this for the fame and the money, but I was able to get my hands on one of the Prism 2021 blaster boxes. So we're going to be doing a bit of a card break come the end of the week. Make sure you check that out on the channel. Toss us a like because it really does help us out. And toss us a subscription as well because Matt, We are so close to reaching that goal of 25,000. When you get to 25, then you get to 50, then you get to 100, and we're off to the races. We have the best fans out there in the sport. The Fight Nighter Nation is strong, Matt, and I'm really looking forward to this entire week.
Yeah, this whole week, we've got a lot of unique content coming up. And again, this fight card, like, this is a big one. You know, there's fight night cards here and there, and there's good pay-per-views. This is truly one of those great pay-per-views, and I could not be more excited for this whole week.
Matt, can't wait for it. Big surprises coming out at the end of the week, so make sure you keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, and as we always say, let's get into it. If you absolutely loved unranked heavyweight bangers like I know Matt does, we have a big-time fight coming up this weekend between Carlos Felipe and Jake Collier. And Matt, for Jake Collier, this guy, former RFA middleweight champ, he came in, made a lot of noise at middleweight, then up at light heavyweight, and then he took a lot of time off, like a lot of time off. Came back at heavyweight, didn't even look like the same guy, went out there and fought Tom Aspinall. And again, this was Tom Aspinall's UFC debut. It was over in Fight Island. And we had an inkling at how good Aspinall was. I mean, a guy that had trained with Tyson Fury for boxing. He was an accredited jiu-jitsu player and coach with his dad at Team Cowbon. Came into that fight, and Jake Collier just couldn't get started. Maybe it was ring rust. Maybe it was jitters. Maybe it was the fact that, again, this guy started off his career at 185, and now he's the heaviest that a heavyweight can get in the cage. What was he, 264.5 his last time out? But for Collier, didn't look good in that fight. So we get an idea of your place in the division. We'll give you Jean Vellante. And again, when the commentators start to talk about intangibles that aren't just like heart and toughness, they're just like, hey, the guy used to play football at Hofstra and he has a good time outside of the cage. You kind of know what kind of a fight you might get. Now, Jean Vellante did not look good in that fight, physically or fight-wise. And I know he did cut Collier early on the bridge of the nose, but while Vellante didn't look all that great, we should give credit where credit's due. Jake Collier looked like the guy that we had seen at middleweight in years past. He threw a lot of leg kicks. He had the athleticism, nice L-step, really good boxing combinations. Totally dominated that fight. Ended up winning on the judges' scorecards 30-27. Collier in a return to form that last time out for Carlos Felipe. And I know you disagree with a lot of people, and we'll get into it a little bit later on, but in his fight against Justin Tafa, majority of people had Tafa winning that fight. Felipe did go out there and put on an instant classic. So, on MMA decisions out of that fight, 4 scored at 29-28 for Felipe, 16 scored at 29-28 for Tafa.
So people just like you and me.
I had a 29-28 Tafa. But regardless, you go look at that fight, it was close. For Carlos Felipe, the only bit of resistance he's faced in the UFC was really the fight against Sergey Spivak, where in the first round, it was all right. And then in the second and the third, Spivak absolutely dominated it. He went out there, had a fight against Jorgen De Castro. Relatively forgettable. Wasn't one of the best fights we've ever seen. Felipe on the winning end there. But you know how good Felipe's boxing is. Jake Collier, bit of a jack of all trades, but very good stand-up. This should be a good fight if it's not.
No, entertainment-wise, I do think this fight will deliver. I guess I should really start my piece like that, because for Jake Collier, I feel like we always have to bring up the fact that he was 185 pounds. For me, baseball reference, I know baseball's not as popular as it used to be, and I don't do many of these, but Rougned Odor used to have this really big beard. He's a baseball player. Now he plays for the Yankees, and they don't allow beards. Looks like a completely different person. No one has made a bigger physical change by just switching weight classes or teams than Jake Collier and Rougned Odor. Because, like you said, he moved up to heavyweight, and I'm like, wait, that's the same guy? But it is, and you're 100% spot on. You didn't really tell, or you weren't really able to tell that it was the same guy in that Aspinall fight, because honestly, I look at Tom Aspinall and I really do see a guy who's going to be around the top 10, top 5 for a very, very long time, and knowing what we know now, there's no shame in losing to a guy like Tom Aspinall. If you go out there and drop Andrei Arlovski and then choke him out, like, that's as impressively as you can beat some veteran like Arlovski, and I really do think Aspinall has that kind of a ceiling. Now, on the flip side for Felipe, and I should also get this out of the way before anything, I don't think either one of these guys are top 15 talents. I like to get excited about a Carlos Felipe fight because it's kind of fun. But, like, at the end of the day, I don't really think he has the skill set that's going to go in there and really challenge a guy like a Marcin Tabora, for instance. I got to stop using his name as an example as, like, a low-level ranked heavyweight, because next thing you know, he might be in there fighting for a title. But with Carlos Felipe, I do like his cardio for heavyweight, which is weird. I do kind of like his boxing, but the thing I really dislike about Carlos Felipe, I don't think he's ever thrown a straight punch in his whole life. The looping hooks that this man throws, yeah, if they land, they're really, really good, don't get me wrong, but the fact that every single thing he does throw is in the form of a hook, a guy like Jake Collier, who, yes, you can say, oh, he might physically not look like he used to, still technically he isn't bad, and he really does put his volume together well. And I know it's really hard to go off of a Jean Vellante heavyweight performance, because listen, Maurice Green got dropped and still submitted Jean Vellante off his back. Stuff like that normally doesn't happen in MMA, but I do think Jake Collier actually looked really good in that fight.
Yeah, and I mean, when you do look at this one, in terms of the odds, Felipe opened a minus 200, went down to about a minus 265. He's now at a minus 181. So there is money just about now coming in on Collier. Open to plus 170. He's now plus 149. And if we have a look over on Tapology map for the total votes, might be a bit of a surprise to some. 972 total votes, 87% Felipe, 46% by decision, 49% by knockout. For the 13% that have Collier, let's have fun with it. 54% by decision, 37% by knockout or TKO. And if you did look at Jake Collier's last fight against Vellante, actually happened to be a future UFC fighter in his corner, being Dakota Bush. They both train out of the pit, or the Smith pit being the gym. But yeah, I mean, I look at this one, it's tricky. Now, I have to say this. For Carlos Felipe, the guy's doing something that's worked for some fighters. Now, when fighters get out of it, they lose. It's called platinum blonde hair. We saw it at a Charles Oliveira champion. And then when his teammate Laureano Staropoli decides, hey, I was platinum blonde the last time I was out, it didn't work. Let's just go regular dark hair. Didn't work for him. For Phil Hawes, platinum blonde, oh boy, I'm beating a Dacus brother. So for Felipe, over on the IGs, he's got the platinum blonde hair, training out of Arte, or not Arte Suave. He's training out of Life Arts MMA, or Macias. But I look at this fight, Matt. It is tricky. Both guys, the bigger heavyweights that you're ever going to find. Height advantage for Collier. It is a tricky one to call. And for me, listen, when the odds are that far apart and I see the fight being close, it's tempting to take the underdog. So what are you thinking here?
It is tempting to take the underdog. And honestly, I was just about to make a very similar point. I don't love the odds on Felipe, but I still think at the end of the day, he is going to win this fight. Because for me, Carlos Felipe is weird. He has a good chin. But the fact that I know he has a good chin means that I know he's been cracked clean, and that does worry me. But when you're in there with a guy like Jake Collier, who is known more for his volume at the heavyweight division than his ability to really go out there and hit you with one shot, it's really hard to go out there and out-volume a guy like Carlos Felipe, especially at heavyweight. Jake Collier, with his style, he could go in there and beat a guy like Maurice Green. He could beat a lot of other unranked heavyweights, I think, and I think Jake Collier could actually go on, I'm not going to get crazy and say a run by any means, but I do think he could string together a couple decent wins at heavyweight. I just don't think he's going to get that streak started with Carlos Felipe. Like I said, Felipe, it's weird because he looks labored from the second the fight starts, very similar to like an Edson Barbosa, for instance. But for the heavyweight division, he is a guy who can keep his output at least steady throughout 3 rounds, which is sort of rare for this division. So I am going to have to stick with the Carlos Felipe pick.
When I look at Jake Collier, the thing that he does a lot better than Felipe does is just throw kicks. And he throws a lot of kicks. He can throw a good high kick. Again, he can work the leg. Now, in the fight against Jean Vellante, it's a lot of 1-2 L step, 1-2 L step, getting out of the way of the danger. It's going to be tricky with those long hooks of Carlos Felipe. But in a fight like this, again, I do see the value in Jake Collier, so I'm going to go shooting for the underdog in this one. I'm going Collier.
So the only thing I'm going to add to that is it's going to be really hard for Collier to get his kicks off because the pressure of Carlos Felipe. Because Carlos Felipe, if he's not in punching range with you, he suffocates all the space. He's not a guy who, he doesn't spend his stalling time, for lack of a better term, in open space in the cage just standing around. When he's looking to stall in a fight, he is using that as a way to control the distance and clinch his opponent. So for that reason, I just don't think Collier is going to be able to get those kicks off, and that's why I got to stick with
But
Felipe.
it should be a close and competitive fight, and when we're split, it's usually a close and competitive fight. So, Matt, I have Jake Collier. In this one, you're going Carlos Felipe. Absolutely love unranked heavyweights that normally deliver, so make sure you check that one out. We've got a great card. 3 5-round fights up at the top. Holy smokes, you're not going to want to miss. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. As we always say, let's get into it. It's starting to become a little bit of a running joke down in the comments section that, wow, Craig says this is his favorite fight of the weekend. But really, if you look at it, this is one of those fights that's going to fly under the radar. And normally when people say that, it's like the feature prelim. But this is going to fly under the radar. We have Francis Fares Ziam taking on Luigi Vendramini. And for Luigi Vendramini, this is a guy that came into the UFC and had an unsuccessful debut. as did his opponent, both guys coming in on short notice in their respective fights. Now, for Vendramini, he came in up a weight class. He was very, very young when he did it. I mean, this is a guy coming into this weekend that just turned 25 a few months ago, taking on Eliseu Zaleski dos Santos. And when he did, it actually wasn't bad until it was. Now, he really kind of had to strike to get the takedown, but he had Zaleski's back for a long time, threatened with a couple of different chokes, got caught in a Peruvian necktie at one point, got out of it, and then ultimately got knocked out in impressive fashion. And for Vendramini, he took a long time off between fights, and there's a reason why. And some people had it out there on the internet, oh, it was a little bit of a knee injury. He tore his ACL, so he had it corrected, went to train. Now, it was corrected, it was good, he was out of the water, or out of the woods. He went from Brazil to Factory X to training a little bit, and then he notices some discomfort, gets it checked out, actually tore the ACL again. They went in to fix it, and they said, oh boy, they did a terrible job the first time, had to fix it. It was a lengthy layoff. So what does Luigi Vendramini go out and do? Well, he works for his parents' bakery and mushroom farm. They've been running it for years, and if you didn't know that, now you get a little bit of a backstory on the Italian stallion. And Matt, I absolutely love Luigi Vendramini and his fights.
I mean, does he have any family gatherings coming up that we should know about? Because you're giving us some insight right now.
He does have a really accredited background, black belt in jiu-jitsu. He's got a Muay Thai background as well. He might not be the most polished striker. That's definitely the version of his game that he definitely has to work on. Obviously, going to Factory X would have helped shore up some of those defensive holes. But if you did go back and watch his last fight, and boy, I say that you should, he took on a guy in Yesin Ayari that when I think of my mind's eye, who has the perfect build for 155? Who has the perfect background for 155? Yesin Ayari has all the tools. He just can never really bring them into practice.
Yeah.
Vendramini finished him in impressive fashion and let out like a call to the heavens when he screamed after that win. It scared me the 3 or 4 times that I watched that fight yesterday. Taking on fighter Ziam in this fight, France's own, the guy's 24, his debut on short notice, UFC 242, taking on Don Madge. Didn't win that fight, but again, this is a guy that's a European K1 kickboxing champ. He really has it on lock with the striking. Takedown defense is always a concern with a kickboxer, but his last time out, picked up a win over Jamie Mullarkey. 5 of 11 was Mullarkey of his takedown attempts, but you did see Ziam pop back up. It was a close fight, but now he's coming into this one with full head of steam and a win.
This should be a really interesting fight because we kind of know what version of both guys that I shouldn't say that. We sort of have an idea as to what both versions are. Vendramini is probably going to have to get takedown to win this fight, and Ziam is going to have to keep this fight at distance, and even then it's going to be a tough fight for him because at the end of the day, you bring up a lot of the background that Vendramini has. Yes, he's good on the ground. Yes, he's good on the feet. But at the end of the day, speed kills in MMA, and Ziam is one of the faster guys at this weight class, especially on the feet. And the fact that he's not just a good striker. There's different kinds of good strikers. Ziam's a long-range striker. He's kind of like a sniper when he's in there. He's not a guy like Cub Swanson who's going to rush forward with big looping hooks and try to get wild to knock you out with one of those big shots. He's someone who, kind of similar to a bigger Sean O'Malley maybe, not the best comp, but along those lines where he is going to be reserved. When you look at his numbers and you know his striking background, you're going to be surprised by how low his output really is. He's not a guy who's going to go in there like a Max Holloway and throw 400 punches to overwhelm his opponent. He's someone who he's going to aim and fire, not just, aim and pray. He's someone who is really technical, and that's the thing I do like about Ziam, especially in this fight. If he can keep this fight at distance and really just pump out his jab and a lot of his straight shots, in theory, he should just be able to keep Vendramini at such a distance and piece him apart on the feet. The flip side, Vendramini, I don't want to say he's like Pedro Munoz, but there are some parts of his game that are similar. The difference is that Pedro Munoz, when he hits people, they just fall down. Like, he has that power X factor. But Vendramini, he will strike his way into the clinch to get the takedown. He will play the striking game a little bit. He's not just going to go in there and shoot up solely for takedowns. And to bring up the Zaleski dos Santos fight, that's just a great example of a fight that's going great until it's not, because he did exactly what you had said. Struck his way into the clinch, does a great job getting onto the back standing of Zaleski, and Alexis dos Santos, and at that time, Alicio was almost top 15. You gotta remember, he was kind of like Vicente Luque before Vicente Luque. He was knocking out a bunch of these unranked guys, and everybody wanted to see him fight because he was super exciting. Reminds you of Vicente Luque. And the fact that Vendramini, who was so green in his career up until that point, was able to put on really an impressive performance even in a loss, is super impressive. He's gonna have to have a very similar game plan in this fight, though. He can't just expect to shoot him for takedowns at a really long range, and he can't expect to try to strike with Ziam for extended periods of time throughout this fight. I really do think that Ziam's the type of guy who's going to be able to find the holes in your striking the more strikes you throw at him. Whereas the more strikes Vendramini throws, I kind of look at it, I know I brought this up when Petr Yan fought Aljamain Sterling, where Aljamain Sterling throws a lot of volume. Well, the more throws he gives, the more reads he's giving his opponent. With a guy like Ziam, if you're giving him a lot of those reads with your volume, he is going to be able to pick you apart at a certain point. So for me, it comes down to, can Vendramini secure the takedown before Ziam secures the timing of Vendramini? It's a really hard ask because with Vendramini, he probably should be able to, and we talked about some of the success in the grappling. I do worry about the distance that this fight is going to be competed at, though, for him.
Yeah, because, I mean, you do look at Vendramini, and obviously just about everybody that fights Fares Ziam, especially in this weight class, they're going to be at a height disadvantage. I mean, Vendramini coming in here roughly 5'8". You have Ziam at about 6'1", and obviously, I mean, the picture looks a little silly, and I did kind of, you know, try and match him up as best I can, but it's true. I mean, there is a big difference. As far as reach is concerned, not the biggest discrepancy, but when you do look at this fight again, Vendramini's got a wicked left hook. Out of his 9 wins, all of them by finish, 4 by knockout, 5 by submission. So it is stuff that you like to see. Ziam definitely has finished wins on his record, but again, both young fighters, both hype prospects in this division, both 25 and under. When we have a look at the odds here, they have shifted, and they've shifted in the last 24 hours. So Vendramini opened a plus 100, or roughly thereabout. Underdog, he's now a plus 112. If you look at it for Ziam, opened up a plus 100. He's a minus 130. So the odds have shifted in favor of the French fighter. If we have a look at Tapology for the overall votes, this is the first time I'm looking at them. 924 total votes, 60% Ziam, 86% by decision. The 40% that have Vendramini, 42% by decision, 14% by submission, 38% by knockout. Now, when I look at this fight, again, I do like Fares Ziam because obviously realizes what he's good at. You're going to work at your defensive grappling. You're going to work at your takedown defense. And then you're just going to try and keep the fight standing. For Luigi Vendramini, he can do it standing. This definitely isn't the fight to do it. But strike to clinch, clinch to take it down, and then work from there. And I like that out of Vendramini. Yes, he might not have as many pro fights, but again, he was hampered by those knee injuries. Didn't really see that a problem in his last fight either. So corrective surgery that he got in Brazil really worked itself out. And I do like the Italian sensation in this fight. I mean, listen, you go back and watch his highlights coming into the UFC, you can tell how impressive this guy is. Not to steal any thunder away from Ziam, but I do like Vendramini here.
So for Fares Ziam, he's not like, and forgive me, this is incredibly unprofessional, who's the fighter at 125? He's like 3-3. He's the glory kickboxer. He fought Sumater.
Zaruk Adeshev.
Zaruk Adeshev, thank you. Zaruk Adeshev, they're going to talk about his boxing background, his kickboxing background, how great of a striker he is. Then you watch him in the cage and you're like, really? Fares Ziam's not that. They are going to talk about his striking background. He's actually going to look like a really good striker in the cage, though. This is going to be a tough fight, and I do worry, like I spoke about, he needs range to get off a lot of his strikes. I just don't think Vendramini is going to give him the chance to get, or to create that distance and really be able to pop him with those shots. The one thing I will say, though, if Vendramini tires in this fight, and if he can't get the finish at some, not even the finish, but if he tires to the point where it's just like, okay, I'm in pure defensive mode in this third round, I wouldn't be surprised if Ziam could knock him out in the third. But aside from Vendramini getting extremely exhausted in this fight, no, I agree with you. I've got the underdog.
Both of us going with the Brazilian Luigi Vendramini, whose nickname's the Italian Stallion. You have the Italian Dream in the main event, Matt. I absolutely love this card. UFC 263 is stacked. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, as we always say. Let's get into it. Next fight coming up on our card, this is straight up weird. I mean, we have Chase Hooper. What is he, the Dream? He used to be the Teenage Dream. Does he listen to Katy Perry? I don't know. Do I listen to Katy Perry?
Sometimes.
Sometimes when I'm alone in the car. But when I look at this one, it's Chase Hooper against Steven Peterson. Now, Steven Peterson, Matt, if people are unaware, this guy competed at LFA 1. Didn't just compete at LFA 1, he competed against then future Bellator title challenger, Leandro Higo. And he lost. And now he's 4-5 since then. And he ended up in the UFC, came in on Contender Series. And listen, it was Contender Series Season 1. Did he win? No, he lost a split to Benito Lopez. But then he gets a win over an LFA. And then he gets a call on short notice. He gets to fight Brandon Davis. He loses. He beats Matt Bessette by split, Bellator zone. Loses to Luis Pena, loses to Bruce Leroy, Alex Caceres, beats Martin Bravo, knocked him out. Tough Latin America Season 3 winner. How impressive is that? Now, the thing is, he's been off for almost 2 years, so I had to do a little bit of a deep dive, and I'm going to read you a little bit of a quote, because you need to get some of this background info. Now, I'm not going tinfoil hat. I'm not going like I did with John McDessie, but the interviewer is the same. It was a James Lynch interview from Odds Checker US. And he said, I had to withdraw out of fights in 2020 and 2021 due to left elbow issue. It was a nagging issue. There were some bone chips in there. Had to get that one cleaned up. They realized that the bone chips were causing issues with the ligaments. Got to get that fixed. So, all right, that's fair. It was a 4 to 5 month recovery time. He was able to get back into the gym, get training. Then he got COVID around Christmas. All right, well, that set him off or set him away for a while.
Never a good time to get COVID, but that's even worse.
Said the whole family got it.
Ooh.
You hate to hear it. Then he got hurt, and he said, and I quote, minor tear in something, I'm not going to mention what or where. I don't love that, but he did say he's 100% now. He's been training fully. And so Stephen Ocho Peterson and the guys at Fortis MMA trying to get a game plan together against Chase Hooper, who coincidentally has been training in the Carolinas with the Thompsons, Senior and Steven. So interesting to see that Chase Hooper making the move over, trying to work his striking. You know he's trained with Ryan Hall in the past to work his ground game and striking, but Chase Hooper trying to make those improvements. The guy's still young. He's under 22, and now he's got to fight against, I'm not going to use the word jobber, but a guy that's lost more fights than he's won since LFA 1.
I'll reference the PFL to make mention of Steven Peterson for a comparison. This is the most Clarissa Shields versus whatever 3 and 6 fighter.
Brittany Elkin.
Brittany Elkin. My apologies. This is so similar to that fight, and it's not even funny. The UFC has Chase Hooper, a very underdeveloped potential future star, maybe. I guess that would be the best way that we can describe him right now. He's coming off a win. So we have to give him an opponent who's probably also coming off a win. Who is there in the UFC around 145 pounds who can probably make that walk? Who's around his level right now? And it's Steven Peterson. And listen, he has 2 UFC wins, and that's really impressive. But even look at who those wins are over. Matt Bessette, who, never really was able to flourish in the UFC. And Martin Bravo, who, you reference his time on Tough Latin America, but his UFC career was less than impressive. And Steven Peterson's kind of odd because he's not really a brawler because he has more technique than that, but sometimes he can just be brought into a brawl, and sometimes he will brawl, even though his best path to victory won't be. Goodness. So, for Peterson, and you bring up the game plan, I don't really know what his game plan is going to be.
Do you just kind of try and tear the tattoo apart?
If that helps you defend takedowns, because really at the end of the day, that's what every Chase Hooper breakdown for me is going to come down to. Can Chase Hooper get his opponent to the ground or not? Because you reference his time training with the Thompsons. I don't know how much that's going to be able to help him in the year that he's been able to train with them. I'm sure it has, don't get me wrong, but I really think changing your game to that degree takes not just 1, not 2, not 3, not 4. It takes 5, 6, maybe even 10 training camps until their knowledge really does start to wear off on you. And yes, beating Peter Barrett's nice, but that doesn't really prove to me that, wow, you belong in the UFC right now. So for Chase Hooper, I guess this is another chance to get a W on his record, and for Steven Peterson, the same thing. But for me, this fight really doesn't do that much for either guy's career in the whole grand scheme of things.
Well, I mean, when you look at Steven Peterson, he had the interview that kind of went viral with MMA Island where he talked about boycotting the Texas Commission because he's lost really close decisions there. And I mean, it is true. You do look at Steven Peterson's record, and we talk about some of the losses. The Benito Lopez on Contender Series, obviously not in Texas. But if we go up from that, Brandon Davis, Luis Pena, Alex Caceres, bit of a pattern there. And you look at his overall body of work. He's got a win over Steve Garcia, who ended up in the UFC. He has 2 wins over Ray Rodriguez back-to-back, ended up in the UFC. A win over Erwin Rivera that ended up in the UFC. So he does have experience against good fighters. The trouble for me in this fight, and it's got to be from the corner of Chase Hooper. Again, you beat Peter Barrett, who is now going back to the Cage Titans promotion that is owned by Calvin Cater that operates in New Hampshire. And listen, a newsflash to MMA fans in the Northeast, NEF, Maine's penultimate MMA organization that Craig Allen covers, big card coming up in August, not in Maine. It's also in New Hampshire, so interesting stuff there. But when I look at that, Chase Hooper, what happens? If he gets jabbed, it's like when Bozer fought Arlovsky. He almost like sells the jab. Like he pops his head back. And when he doesn't get the takedown, sometimes he'll just kind of accept it and try and pull guard or try and kind of pull people down to the mat. And it's not always the best look, especially if you're trying to score. Now, from Peter Barrett to Steven Peterson, a little bit of a jump in competition. It's not the biggest, but it is a jump in competition. And for Steven Peterson, again, you know the level of competition that he's faced in the past. So without further referencing that, when we look at the odds, Peterson open to minus 180 favorite. He's a minus 117 right now. Chase Hooper open to plus 155 underdog. He's around a minus 106. So the odds are starting to close in on par. If we have a look at Tapology for the overall votes, 948 of them, 71% Hooper, 73% by submission, the 29% that had Peterson, 54% by decision, 38% by knockout. Should be noted, again, for Chase Hooper, the only loss was to Alex Caceres, but it was a super one-sided loss. And even in the fight in his debut against Daniel Tamor, he got cracked a couple times. Now, he did finish that fight, so credit where it's due, but yeah, I'm interested to see this one, because it's weird.
It is a really weird fight. Personally, I still think Chase Hooper's going to win this fight. I know I've talked a lot about the things that Peterson can do to avoid Chase Hooper's takedowns, but listen, remember when the odds were really close when Sean O'Malley fought Thomas Almeida? And knowing what we know now, that's kind of ridiculous. But at the time, it was like, okay, O'Malley's still some question marks we don't really know yet. I feel like this fight's very similar. The UFC wants Chase Hooper to win, and they know who they're putting them in there with. Steven Peterson, it's not like he's a scrub on the mat by any means, but when Chase Hooper wins fights, it's because of how good his grappling is, and I think the UFC knows what they're doing with their matchmaking. I'm going to have to side with Chase Hooper in this fight, just because I don't think Steven Peterson is going to be able to do enough to win the fight, even if Chase Hooper can't get the takedown every single round.
Yeah, I just think that Peterson's going to be able to outstrike him, and then once you start to frustrate a Chase Hooper, well, what does he do? It's going to be kind of that desperation mode, the long lunging takedowns, the attempts at like an Imanari roll, things like that. So for me, I'm going to go with the guy that trains with Miles Johns, Aaron Phillips, and the crew over there at Fortis MMA. I'm going with Ocho Peterson. You got the dream, Chase Hooper. Really looking forward to this card. We have the 3 fights, 5 rounders up at the top. Let's keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, as we always say. Let's get into it. Really interesting fight coming up this weekend at 135 pounds. We have the former title challenger Alexis Davis taking her talents to 135. And I should say that her last fight was against a flyweight, but it was up at 135. She took on Sabina Mazo. And Matt, I threw all of the red flags out there ahead of that fight. Alexis Davis, what does she do? Gritty performances, always wins second rounds, and has only lost in that win streak to top-level competition at 125. And what did she do? She kind of schooled Sabina Mazo.
Okay. Yes and no. Here's the thing. I just don't think Sabina Mazo was that great to begin with. Here's the thing. I feel like a lot of people are going to look at that last fight with Alexis Davis and put a ton of stock into it because she did beat a good prospect. But, and for all the reasons that you appropriately brought up, it was always just a really bad matchup for Mazo. So I feel like a lot of people are going to be more confident in Alexis Davis this weekend than they probably should be.
Now, if you do look at Alexis Davis, and I broke it down again, if you want to check out that video, I'll pop it right up there. You can check it out. But the fact that Alexis Davis, in that 3-fight skid that she did have, and it was over a long period of time, Caitlin Chukagian, Jennifer Maia, and Viviane Araújo, loses the first round in every fight. And the trouble with Alexis Davis is the fact that she has, 30 pro fights? And if you punch her just once in the face in the first round, it goes the shade of red of one of those sound tiles. And then she'll start to bleed a little bit. And listen, I know Anthony Kiedis is a big MMA fan, but the scar tissue that you wish you saw, well, it's in Alexis Davis fights. We see it in the first round. She gets a little bloodied up, and then she kind of gets into the fight. She'll win a second round. She did it in all of those fights, and then she might lose a third round. Now, again, against Mazo, looked really good. So let's focus on Pannie Kianzad. This is somebody that's been on a lot of people's radars, even before The Ultimate Fighter Season 28. She ends up losing in the finals to Macy Chasson at a Fortis MMA. So what does Kianzad do? Well, she doesn't take another UFC fight. She goes, fights on the regional scene in Sweden against the French fighter Ioni Razafarzen, gets the win there, then comes into the UFC. And what has she done since? Well, has it been the highest level competition? I don't know. I mean, she did end up coming back and losing to Julia Avila in a decision. And listen, Avila looked great in that one. But then she rattles off wins over Jessica Rose Clark, Rowdy Betch, and then she gets a big win over Sajara Eubanks. And I get it. It was a 29-28. Eubanks able to kind of get in there and make it scrappy. But for Kianzad, takedown defense was relatively on point, and it was those long distance strikes she was able to use. Now, in my mind's eye, I have to say, I think of Pannie Kianzad as like a really, really tall, long fighter. She's going to be at a disadvantage in some of those areas in this fight. That's what makes it all the more interesting. It's really the skill and the overall career and the durability of Alexis Davis and the soaring phoenix that is Banzai Kianzad.
I don't know if I'm that excited for this fight, but this is interesting because for Alexis Davis, you've reached the top of the mountain. You did it. You weren't champ, but you at least got to the title shot, which is something that most UFC fighters will never get the chance to do. and then she had her UFC career. Like, you know what I mean? Most people is, okay, I've had my UFC career, then I get to that top, and then, you know, I might have a few more fights, I'm either champ, whatever, and then I'm done. Alexis Davis really, she's had 2 different careers. She had her career up until that point, and then she's kind of had this second little sort of MMA legend career part, if you will. And it's really weird for Alexis Davis because it felt like she was one of those fighters who I can't fight at 115. I'm not big enough for 135, but there wasn't a 125 pound division around. So her, very similar to like Jessica, I know, was very vocal about it once they made the 125 pound division, that, oh, finally, there's a place for me. And I thought that's where Alexis Davis was going to be for the majority of her career. But sometimes the grass isn't always greener on the other side. And that's what we found out when Davis did make that move down. And for me, you bring up the level of competition. I do think the weight cut was just hard on her to get down to 125 pounds, especially at this stage of her career. It's not like she's a fighter who's only, 29, 30. She is quite a bit older, and that does concern me even up in this fight against Pannie Kianzad, because the one thing about Alexis Davis is her game hasn't really evolved. There's some fighters who every time, oh, they've added this wrinkle to their game or that wrinkle to their game. Alexis Davis still is, I would say, sort of a basic Muay Thai fighter with decent pressure and okay clinch game. Like, it's not like she's bad on the ground. Don't get me wrong.
Great in top control.
Great in top control. Lacks the wrestling against top level 135ers, I should say, to really get anyone down to the ground, though. And that's what really concerns me about Alexis Davis in this fight. I think she can strike with Pannie Kianzad for certain moments in this fight. I just don't think she's going to be able to go in there and have a kickboxing fight with Kianzad for 15 minutes and not get pieced up. Because like you said, she doesn't show damage very well. She's not a fighter like Frank Camacho, who the durability's gone away. Alexis Davis is still a very durable fighter, but the damage does start to show on her, very similar to a Nate Diaz, for instance, or even Lauren Murphy, who we'll be talking about later on this card as well. With Kianzad, I do think that if she can just keep this fight at range, use her jab a lot, and the fact that Alexis Davis, she just like to throw the leg kick of her own, so she's going to be happy at standing at range with Kianzad. I just think that's the range that Kianzad is going to have the most success in.
Yeah, I mean, Port Colborne's going to have to watch this fight with bated breath, because you have a look at the odds in this one. I mean, Kianzad, relatively, I'd say, heavily favored. I mean, moderately favored, if you will, but she opened a minus 235. She's minus 217 right now. Davis opened a plus 200. She's at a plus 175 right now, and if we have a look at the Tapology predictions, surprised me as it is to you, maybe not so much, but 898 total votes, 82% Kianzad, 92% by decision for the 18% that have Davis, 79% by decision. I think the safe one would be fight goes the distance, and it's not just based on those, but again, you look at it for Pannie Kianzad in the fights back in the UFC. Decision Rose Clark, decision Correa, decision against Eubanks. She lost a decision to Avila, and she finished Ione Razafarzin over on the regional scene. And for Davis, out of her last 5, Carmouche, Chukagian, Maia, Arujao, and then Mazao, all by decision. I think that's a safe one to go with. For me, though, again, I will side with Arte Suave's own Pannie Kianzad in this fight.
Yeah, I like Kianzad quite a bit in this fight. It's for Alexis Davis. I know what I'm going to get from her, and I just don't think it's going to be enough to beat Pannie Kianzad. I don't like the fact that, again, her range with that leg kick is going to keep her in range of all those strikes of Kianzad. I'm not saying Kianzad's going to go on some run and challenge Amanda one day, but I do think she has a decent ceiling in this division as well, but I am excited for this fight.
I mean, crazier things have happened. You talk about challenging Amanda. Alexis Davis finished her years ago, but both of us going with Sweden's Pannie Kianzad to get the win. Absolutely love the fight. Flyweight gold on the line. You got middleweight gold on the line. You got Pride at 170 pounds in a 5-rounder. So, Matt, you're not going to want to miss this action coming up this weekend. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, as we always say. Let's get into it. Big time fight coming up this weekend at featherweight, and this is one of my favorite ones on the card. We have this one pegged as a possible fight of the night between me and Hakeem Dawodu taking on Movsar Evloev. Matt, Movsar Evloev, former M1 Global Bantamweight champ, undefeated. Now, has he lost rounds in the UFC? Yeah. But who doesn't? And you look at the wins that he has so far in his young UFC career, coming in here beating Sungwoo Choi, beating Enrique Barzola, beating Mike Grundy, and then his last time out getting the win on somewhat a short notice against Nick Lentz. Absolutely buzzsawing through the competition. If you look at it, Sungwoo Choi, jack of all trades. You look at the other 2 wins, I mean, Mike Grundy is definitely a wrestler at his core, and that's what made that fight so much fun. And Enrique Barzola, I mean, the scrambles that guy has in his fights are a lot of fun to watch. Now, the last time against Nick Lentz, again, it was a split decision, but if you watch the fight after the first round, it's just Evloev teeing off. And I mean, Nick Lentz talked about it going into that fight. He had issues with double vision in one of his eyes. And you saw him even after the first round, an eye started to swell up. And then after that fight, ultimately retired. So from Nick Lentz, hell of a career for the Carney. But in that fight, maybe won the first round just based on the guillotines that he was pulling. He had 2 really tight, but after that, Movsar Evloev, the guy's a master of sport in Greco-Roman wrestling, and does it ever show? He's a guy that used to train out of Tiger Muay Thai for the longest time, and you can see it in his strikes, a lot of flashiness, a lot of spinning attacks, now an American top team with a lot of the bigger names in the show. And for me and Hakeem, this is a guy coming out of Champions Creed Martial Arts. He's a Muay Thai fighter, but he has very, very good takedown defense, and he has faced wrestlers. The only knock on him, especially on the win streak that he has, 5 of them, 4 of those wins by decision, 3 of them by split. And if we can name them, Kyle Bokiak, he had a split his second to last time out against Julio Arce, one of Tiger Schulman's guys, and then a split against Zubaira Tukhugov. But overall, Hakeem Dawodu, and Matt, you love it when people say this, is he Canada's best shot at a title?
If he is, then we're in some trouble. Because here's the thing, Hakeem Dawodu is a really good fighter, but he doesn't do any one thing so well that makes me think, oh wow, this guy's going to be in the top 5. His striking's good, but this is my problem. He's not a powerful striker for how hard he throws his strikes. Hakeem Dawodu is not a guy who's going to go in there, hit you with a 1-2, and you immediately fall down. He needs combinations to land for him to really get success. Because look at the majority of his fights. When he has success, it's when he is putting his combinations together. He can fall into that kind of single shot rhythm where he will give up rounds and really just portions of fights because of his lack of activity. And that's something that I'd always consider with Dawodu, because we talk about guys with a lot of power and guys then we talk about guys with a lot of volume. He's kind of in the middle for both. He has great technique, but he lacks the overwhelming volume to really go out there and just put it on people. And he lacks the power so that guys aren't really afraid that, oh wow, he's got that one-hitter quitter. What Hakeem Dawodu does have, though, is phenomenal leg kicks, and I really do think those are going to be the key to this fight. Similar to how Nick Lentz was able to use them against Movsar Evloev. Because for Nick Lentz, you have the guillotines. The 2 things he still does at a very high level are leg kicks and guillotines, and those are the 2 things he had quite a bit of success with against Movsar Evloev. The difference is that Dawodu's leg kicks are much more powerful at this stage of his career than Nick Lentz are. The difference is that Dawodu doesn't really have a ground game that he can threaten off his back with in the same way that Lentz did. Movsar Evloev's not going to be worried about taking Hakeem Dawodu down whatsoever during this fight. He did have a little bit of concern going for the takedown, especially after those early sub attempts from Lentz. He's not going to have any of that hesitation in this fight, and that's why I think, honestly, stylistically, this is one of the harder matchups really on the whole card for a fighter. Hakeem Dawodu's got his work cut out, because not only is he fighting a fighter who has this massive wrestling advantage over him, Movsar Evloev is going to be able to stand on the feet with Hakeem Dawodu and probably even win rounds that way too. I'm not saying that's going to be his best path to victory, don't get me wrong, but I do think he's a fighter who can go out there, get the takedown when he needs it, strike his way into the clinch when he has to. For Dawodu, I just don't know how he's going to keep Movsar Evloev at such a range so that he can catch him on his way in.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at it for me and Hakeem, he has 1 performance of the night win over Yoshinori Hori, a guy that was way too young in his career, and I wish he would come back to the UFC because he's really doing well outside of it. But since then, again, the fight against Arce gets 1 takedown, Tukhugov gets 1 takedown, Bokiak gets a couple, but overall, the takedown defense of Dawodu has held up 85% so far in his career. And again, he had that 1 stumbling block out of the gate coming out of World Series. He was a huge prospect, loses to the Scot in Danny Henry, but ultimately a great career so far for him. And again, this is a showcase fight for the division on 2 guys that have just knocked down the door. And really, the winner of this fight is set up. And if you look at it for Hakeem Dawodu, it was kind of interesting because he was supposed to take on Shane Burgos back in January. There was a bit of a shoulder injury that forced Dawodu out. For Movsar Evloev, you look at it, he was booked to take on Nate Landwehr. He was booked at one point to take on Douglas Silva de Andrade. Like, there's been some names there in the past. This is a great opportunity for both guys. When we do look at the odds for this one, not all that close. Evloev opened a -280 favorite. He's about a -251 or thereabouts. Dawodu opened a +240. He's at a +199. If we have a look at the Tapology votes, not that bad. 991 of them so far. 72% Evloev, with the majority, 88% going by decision. The 28% that have Dawodu, 69% by decision. You've seen that from Dawodu in his career. Maybe he's going to go out there all mean and such, try and finish the fight. Taking on a really tough out, though, in Movsar Evloev. And this is a guy that, again, when you're training with the best of the best at American Top Team, it's really iron sharpening iron. And if we talk about some of the guys that he trains with, he's got David Zavada in some of the pictures, Thiago Moises. Who else did I have out there? Oh, Magomed Karimov, the unsung hero at 170 with PFL. So a lot of really good wrestlers, but guys that can strike as well. I've got Evloev here.
Yeah, so do I. Again, stylistically, it's just a really hard matchup for Dawodu. Be interested to see what Hakeem's game plan is in this fight. I'm assuming he's going to be very leg kick heavy, but at the end of the day, I do have to decide with Evloev.
Both of us going with the Russias. Movsar, Evloev to get the win. Absolutely love the fight. We got three. I almost said five. We have 3 5-round fights up at the top. You're not going to want to miss those. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. Big time fight coming up this weekend in the women's flyweight division, Matt. We have our 2020 Female Fighter of the Year with Fight Night Picks in Lucky Lauren Murphy taking on Joanne Calderwood. And these are two vets of the craft. Matt, between the two of them, 22 UFC fights for Murphy. She's won her last 4, capping it off with a great finish win over short notice opponent in Lilia Shakarova. And for Joanne Calderwood, alternating wins and losses, and really, if I break this one down and you know, kind of just don't dance around the whole thing, Joanne Calderwood struggled in a fight that I thought maybe she'd win against Jennifer Maia. And again, if you're Lauren Murphy and you're going to go in there with a game plan, that Jennifer Maia game plan worked well. I don't know if she's going to be able to do it, but if you have a look at Joanne Calderwood, normally in the clinch with her elbows, she's able to put off a lot of offense. And for Murphy, that might end up being a problem. So ultimately in this fight, it is a really interesting fight. I mean, both women, do they have a bit of a claim to kind of fight for the title? Maybe with a win? I'm interested to see.
This is a really odd fight because when Lauren Murphy brings to the cage, and I gotta get this out of the way, Lauren Murphy can't do what Jennifer Maia did. At all. Like, Jennifer Maia is so much better on the mat than Lauren Murphy. It's not even funny. Lauren Murphy, I look at her more like I look at the fight that Calderwood had with Jessica Ai. Lauren Murphy's going to have that forward pressure. Yes, she does have a little bit more wrestling in her back pocket, but when I think Lauren Murphy's game plan in this fight, I think her game plan is going to be very similar to what Jessica Ai did. I think she's going to use forward pressure. I think she's going to try to use her boxing. I just think she can't use her pressure to collapse that distance so much that then she does find herself into the clinch with Calderwood. Because like you mentioned, Calderwood's best position, and it's not even close. Her best position is that Muay Thai clinch. Great elbows over the top, really good knees to the body too. But my problem with Calderwood in that position is when she throws knees to the body, she can get lazy with bringing them back down, and that's actually how she gets taken down. If she has you in that plum clinch, and she's kneeing to the body, a lot of her opponents just grab that back knee or the back leg that is on the ground, completely take her base away. And for Calderwood, it does kind of suck that her best strength also is attached to her biggest weakness, because I think Calderwood's just her striking. Maybe it's not on a Valentina level, but her striking alone in this division should probably get her a title shot. It's the grappling aspect of her game is such a big liability that most other top fighters in this division are going to look at Joanne Calderwood and say, okay, I need a double leg takedown and I'm going to be able to have success against her. But I do think that Calderwood started to find some counters to that. She does have good knees now when people do shoot in. They don't always have to come from the clinch, and her footwork has gotten better as she's progressed. The one thing that is surprising though is I always look at Lauren Murphy as, oh, she's going to be the older fighter coming into this fight. Yes, she is, but just barely. And you had mentioned it with all the experience that both these women have. Lauren Murphy's 37 years old, but it's not like Joanne Calderwood is on youth's side. She's also 35. So honestly, this is an interesting fight because of both where both fighters are in their careers. But for me, I just think Lauren Murphy's on a bit better streak. I think the confidence behind Lauren Murphy, I think Lauren Murphy is more sure of what she does well. And I understand that's a very Robin Black thing to say, but just hear me out. Joanne Calderwood, in between rounds, can fight like a completely different fighter. Sometimes she will go very clinch heavy. Sometimes she'll just kind of stand at a distance, try to outbox her opponents. And then sometimes she will try to get into these weird clinch and grappling battles with her opponents. And that's what's always going to make me really nervous about Joanne Calderwood. At least with Lauren Murphy, listen, if she gets taken down, I think she can work her way back up to her feet. I think she can at least go and attempt a takedown. I don't think she can submit Joanne Calderwood, but I do think she can at least spend enough time in that top position to win rounds. And at the end of the day, that's all I think Lauren Murphy needs to do.
Lauren Murphy's had a weird UFC career too, because it was Lauren Murphy at bantamweight, Lauren Murphy on the Ultimate Fighter, Lauren Murphy on flyweight, and again, best streak she's had of her career. And even if you take out the Shakarova fight, Modafferi a win, Andrea Lee, and then back to 2019, finishing Mara Romero Barella. Before that, a loss to Jerry Eubanks, who, if she can make the weight at 125, could have been a champ at one point. Did not happen, work out that way for her. For Calderwood, the 5-on in, it goes back a ways, but a win over Lipsky, a loss to Chukagian, a win by split as well against Andrea Lee, and that loss to Maia. And of course, the win over Jessica Ai just 4 months ago for Murphy, 7 months ago since the last time that we saw her. In terms of the odds on this one, Murphy, the underdog, open a plus 180. She's now a plus 118. And if we have a look at Calderwood, open a minus 150. She's about a minus 114 or thereabouts. votes. So she's still the slight favorite in terms of the votes on Tapology, 969 of them, 63% with Calderwood, 37% with Murphy, large majority amongst them going with the fighters to win by decision. So maybe you do like that prop. But again, I look at this one, who's the more well-rounded fighter? Who's the more paths to victory? For me, it is Lucky Lauren Murphy, and it's a tricky fight. It is a really close fight. The odds reflect that. If you have a strong case either way, I could see it that way. And when this comes to Saturday on Question Mark Kicks, if anybody saw, I put a picture out there before the show of like my final picks, and I wrote them down on a piece of paper. And I had 2 or 3 of them as like 50-50 right down the middle. Bozer Latifi was one. The main event was another one of them. But yeah, this is another one I'd be on the fence 50-50, but I'm going to go with Murphy here.
Yeah, I do have to agree with you. I just think she has more ways to win this fight at the end of the day. Joanne Calderwood, she's like a machete. Yeah, the Muay Thai is really good, but she only has the one tool. Lauren Murphy's like a Swiss Army knife. Yes, that one knife might not be as big, but she's got way more tools at the end of the day, and I really do think she is the more skilled fighter. And for those reasons, I think Lauren Murphy's got this one.
Yeah, Matt, and I don't think if you were in a fight in the streets between somebody with a machete and if I gave you a Swiss Army knife, that you'd be able to beat them. So we'll see what happens. Apparently we're going with the Swiss Army knife. Our 2020 Fight Night Picks Fighter of the Year in the female category, Lucky Lauren Murphy. Absolutely love the fight. Big moves up at 125 pounds. You're not going to want to miss the rest of the week that we have planned with Fight Night Picks, all kinds of great stuff. So as we always say, let's get into it. Now, coming up this weekend, we have a rematch in the main event. You have Vettori taking on Israel Adesanya. In your co-main event, you have a rematch in a fight that ended in a draw between Brandon Moreno and Deiveson Figueiredo. We also have another rematch on this card. You might not know that. Eric Anders, your boy, Roll Tide, Nick Saban's buddy, taking on Darren Stewart. And their first fight not that long ago ended in a no contest because Eric Anders got trigger happy and threw an illegal knee. And maybe Herb Dean could have finished the fight before that happened, but we're here and now we're talking about it. Now, if we go back to our preparations for Darren Stewart and Eric Anders, you look at it. For Anders, he's popped up to 205. He spent time at 185. He has some big wins. He has some interesting losses that maybe they were fights that I didn't think that he lost. And for Darren Stewart, he's looked great, and he went on a good run. And I mean, you look at the losses as of late. Yeah, he had that loss to Bartosz Fabinski in the one-off over with Cage Warriors because the cards got shuffled around due to the pandemic. And yes, he lost a split to Kevin Holland, but it was a decent fight. The wins, albeit nice, Maki Pitolo, he finished him, and Duran win, and there was a lot of bad blood in that fight. But going into their first fight, we both had Darren Stewart to win. In the opening seconds, when he cracks Eric Anders, rocks him, and then does the Patrick Roy, where I'm getting out of here. Hey, Darren, why the celly, buddy? Because he celebrated, and then it went along a little bit more, and then Anders cracks him after a lot of clinch work, and Anders pulls away, and like I said, nearly finishes the fight. With all that in mind, and the fact that rematches normally favor the guy that won the first time, or the gal, or the car, or whatever it is in a rematch, I mean, what are your takeaways here? Because the dentist, you can't count him out in a fight like this, but it is tricky.
This fight, it is tricky because, honestly, Darren Stewart has enough power to knock out Eric Anders. We know that because of their first fight. Eric Anders has enough power to knock out Darren Stewart. And that's not something I'd accounted for going into their first fight. I didn't think Eric Anders had enough power to really hurt and put down Darren Stewart. But guess what? Our opinions can change. I think Jonathan Martinez might be champ one day. At the end of the day, and if you want more of a breakdown, I guess the first video would probably be a better thing to go off of, because honestly, I do just have that opinion going into this fight. Whoever lands first is probably going to win. If Darren Stewart launches an overhand right, catches Eric Anders clean, it's going to put him down, and same thing vice versa. I just think, knowing what I know now, Eric Anders is slightly more likely to land that shot.
Yeah, I mean, for Eric Anders, the long southpaw that doesn't really kick, and I mean, we'll see if that does change in his game plan, because for Darren Stewart, who the hell knows what gym he's going to represent? The MMA Clinic, I've got a couple of different boxing gyms, Team Resistance. If you go have a look at his Instagram, he's doing a lot of strength and conditioning training. I mean, the guy can lift, I think, 3 plates on either side. He's doing his squats. For Eric Anders, though, this is a guy that trained out of Alabama. Now he's at Fight Ready. You might say, oh, okay, well, Fight Ready. A lot of fighters in the lower weight classes. And you're right. But I threw down a few names that I've seen him with. Eddie Cha, obviously the coach in his corner, but the Korean Zombie, Marco Madsen, Leandro Higo, who we talked about earlier on when we were talking about Ocho Peterson tonight. But I do like that out of Eric Anders where, yeah, with Fight Ready, you do see a lot of wrestlers that round things out. For Eric Anders, they're going to say it. It's the Jean Vellante comp to a certain extent. But again, the guy won a national championship in football, so why not talk about it? I will ever so slightly go with Anders. I mean, in terms of the odds, minus 110 was where they both open at par. Anders right now, minus 147 for Stewart, plus 121. Over on Topology, 76% of 937 total votes going with Anders. You get 64% by knockout, 24% with Stewart, 36% have him to win by knockout. I wouldn't have this one on my card because, again, it's so unpredictable. You saw what happened in the first. Either guy had a claim to finishing the other guy. I'll go with Anders, but it is tricky.
This is as much of a coin flip as any other fight on the card. It is. At the end of the day, though, I agree with you. I've got Eric Anders. Both guys have enough power to knock each other out, but again, Eric Anders, I just think, has the slightly higher likelihood of landing that shot.
Don't throw an illegal knee.
Please.
Don't let Herb Dean ref this one, and if it's War Chris Tione, it could be fun. But please don't. Like, let's go with conservative referee, like Mark Smith or Jason Herzog. Love the fight. Big fights up at the top of the card. You're not going to want to miss them, so keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, as we always say. Let's get into it. When it comes to our next fight at lightweight, well, we've been living most of our lives living in a striker's paradise. We have Drew Dober taking on Brad Quake Riddell. And for the guy representing New Zealand, the former striking coach at Tiger Muay Thai, the man representing City Kickboxing, Brad Riddell's had a really interesting UFC tenure. And if we look at it so far, he has one loss from years past, but big wins in the UFC, albeit 3 against Jamie Mullarkey, Magomed Mustafayev, if you thought that he won, and Lecco Alexis Silva, a guy that Michael Bisping once touted as a very good prospect in the lightweight division. For Brad Riddell, he was supposed to have a coming out party of sorts just this past spring. It was supposed to be the co-main event to Brunson and Kevin Holland. Yikes. But he was originally supposed to be taking on Gregor Gillespie. There were COVID issues, his camp, the Volkanovski camp, all over. And yeah, that fight ended up falling through. For Drew Dober, he took a fight not that long ago. It was on relative short notice against Islam Makhachev. And Islam gonna Islam, and he absolutely dominated that one. But before that, Drew Dober had 2 really important wins against good strikers. And one of them, a little bit more classically trained boxer, Nazar Hakpras, finished him in impressive fashion. Nobody probably thought that was going to happen other than Factory X and Drew himself. And then he picked up a big win over Alexander Hernandez. So again, little blip in the radar against Makhachev, a borderline, if not ranked guy. And could he beat guys in the top 10, top 5? I don't know, but a lot of people seem to think he could. For Brad Riddell, unproven commodity, but you know exactly what his striking is, and if his takedown defense is on point, he could really go on a run. We're going to find that out in this fight here. I absolutely love it.
Oh, this easily could have been Fight of the Night, or on our Fight of the Night screen at the start of the show, without a doubt, because with Brad Riddell, you kind of know what you're going to get, but he is adding new wrinkles to his game, because he is only 9-1, and then you look at it, he's barely been fighting MMA for very long. Like, he is adding all the grappling now. Like, with Brad Riddell, it's interesting because it's not often that you have fighters come over, and of course, we're going to reference the main event too, but who have so much experience, it's just not in MMA. His experience really stems from kickboxing, and you can see that when Brad Riddell's in there, I always talk about this, when guys go to their basic instincts, oh, I'm hurt, what am I going to do? Am I going to try to run? Am I going to try to wrestle? Brad Riddell's going to get really technically sound and throw smart overhands, because Brad Riddell can get brought into a war, don't get me wrong, but even his version of like a war version of a fight, a brawl if you will, he's still fairly technical, and that's why this fight against Drew Dober should be so fun, because the guys who Drew Dober struggles with are the grapplers. Brad Riddell's not shooting a takedown on Drew Dober. I can almost guarantee you that throughout this fight. The one thing that I do wonder, though, is how's Drew Dober going to deal with the speed advantage that Brad Riddell has in this fight? Because I do think Drew Dober has decent punching power for this weight class. I think he's got decent hand speed, too. Brad Riddell's got really, really good hand speed and technique, and that's the one area of it where I think Drew Dober's going to have a little bit of trouble. I think if Drew Dober can force Brad Riddell to move backwards, he's going to have some success of his own, but that really is kind of the weird X factor for this fight. Who is the one moving forward? Because if Brad Riddell's moving forward, throwing combinations, throwing leg kicks, there's not too many people who weigh 155 pounds who are going to be able to beat that guy. But on the other hand, if Drew Dober's the one moving forward, and if he is able to catch Brad Riddell with even one decent shot, I do think Drew Dober has enough of a ground game that if he's going to be able to get on top of Brad Riddell, listen, I'm not here to tell you Drew Dober's going to bring out the wrestling shoes, look like Daniel Cormier and start shooting single legs, but I do think that if anyone's shooting a takedown in this fight, it is going to be the more well-rounded fighter in Drew Dober, but I could not be more excited for this fight at lightweight.
And for Drew Dober, we haven't really seen that. Again, he's been content to strike with strikers, and against the wrestler, it was kind of like, whoop, and now I'm down against Makhachev. But in a fight like this, totally different, 2 primary strikers, you have the southpaw in Dober, and really fight IQ comes into play, and who knows how good their fight IQ is until we actually see the fight. So when I do look at the odds for this one, you have Dober, the favorite, open to minus 140 or thereabouts. He's still roughly there. Brad Riddell open about a plus 120. He's about a plus 110 now. The odds are kind of getting a little bit closer to par. Tapology votes are not all that close. 985 of them so far. 67% Dober, 51% have him to win by decision, 41% by knockout. For the 33% that have Riddell, it's 78% by decision. Does any of that surprise you?
A little bit, because Drew Dober is the more proven commodity of the two. And I know we talk about experience a lot and how much of an X factor that is. I honestly think this is a fight where experience isn't going to play that much of a factor, because for Drew Dober, he's fighting a guy who does everything he does. Like, Drew Dober's not going to have to really retool his whole game and his whole camp to fight someone who's stylistically much different than himself. Drew Dober knows, okay, I'm a striker, he's a striker, I can just work on my striking this camp. And with that confidence, I do think we're going to see Drew Dober open up with his striking a little bit more than we have seen him in his past few fights. But with all that being said, I think Brad Riddell has a really, really good chin, and I think he's got the striking to go in there and beat a guy like Drew Dober. Brad Riddell also doesn't have to worry about the takedown, and I think that's going to be the most dangerous version of Brad Riddell. So at the end of the day, I do have to pick Brad Riddell.
I mean, we'll see what Drew Dober comes in with, because again, like we said, if you look at it overall, Hernandez took him down. When was the last time Drew Dober was successful with the takedown? Against John Tuck back in August of 2018. Bellator's John Tuck. So it is a really tricky one. We'll see what game plan both guys come out with. But again, maybe you want to take like the under, not the fight not to go the distance, because both guys have the tools to get it done. I will ever so slightly edge Brad Riddell as well. I can't believe I'm even saying that, because again, I normally go with experience, but when I look at it, if we're talking strike IQ, I don't think the southpaw aspect's really going to throw Brad Riddell for all that big of a loop. And if we're going to strike, I mean, we saw him get a win over Magomed Mustafayev, who, listen, the guy's got to fight more, but I love his game. So, ever so slightly going with Brad Riddell from me. You got New Zealand's own as well?
I do. I just think he's the slightly cleaner fighter technique-wise, and I do think that's what this fight's going to come down to.
All right, Matt, we're both going with New Zealand's own Brad Riddell to get the win. You're not going to want to miss the rest of our predictions and previews for this card. We got a lot of them, so check them out in the playlist. We got a lot of great stuff coming out at the end of the week as well. You're not going to want to miss, so keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. As we always say, let's get into it. So back in the 80s, like if you kind of hooked up with Annie Lennox somewhere at a club, or if you were listening to a little bit of the sweet dreams are made of these, do you think she'd ever think that there'd be a guy at 205 pounds that's a lanky striker from Southpaw that throws a lot of kicks that would take that as a nickname?
Probably not.
Probably not, but that's what we have coming up this weekend. We've got Paul Craig taking on Jamal Hill. His nickname's Sweet Dreams. He's won every fight except for the one that's a no contest that he did win. But listen, you got to lay off those recreational herbs and spices, as they say. But he beat Klidson Abreu in that one. His last time out, picking up a really big win over Vince St. Preux. And it was really like, hey, here's the torch. Now it's passed. We had two really long, rangy kickers and strikers from Southpaw. And it was Jamal Hill winning out in impressive fashion in that fight. Now, he's taking on Paul Craig. And Matt, for Paul Craig, my knock on the light heavyweight division is always, oh, well, go look at the bottom of the rankings. There's Paul Craig. Like, he's just the weirdest ranked fighter. But if you do look into it, his last 4 fights, a finish win over Vinicius Morea, a draw against Shogun Hua, a finish win over Gadzhimurad Antigulov, and another win over my childhood idol, Mauricio Shogun Hua, because I was a weird kid, and he tapped due to strikes, and it made me sad. Now, originally this fight was booked to be taking place back at the start of the year. Jamal Hill had to withdraw, but we get him in this time. And Matt, for Sweet Dreams, it's a style versus style. It's a clash of styles. And Jamal Hill, I don't know, you can knock anybody out. And Paul Craig, well, if he gets lucky, he can. And he's got really, really sneaky jiu-jitsu, especially even off his back. He's great. But sometimes he throws spin kicks against good strikers and gets knocked out by Alonzo Menafield. And this is that kind of plays into this one.
Paul Craig isn't a very good striker. That's just the truth. Like, he isn't. He's a great grappler, don't get me wrong, but you just can't be good at everything in MMA. This is my problem. Jamal Hill has wicked takedown defense, and you say how OSP kind of passed him the torch of a long-range striker. He's that, but he can also pressure guys. Like, OSP didn't really have this pressure where, oh, he's chasing you down constantly in a fight. Jamal Hill has all the range, all the technique, all the power, all the hand speed, all the kicks, and the pressure to go along with it. This is a really interesting fight because if Paul Craig is able to secure the takedown, then I'm sure he's going to be able to make use of it. I just think stylistically, this is a nightmare for Paul Craig. Like, Jamal Hill is everything everybody wanted, like Johnny Walker to be, for instance. Like, Jamal Hill can knock out pretty much anybody at 205, has good cardio, has good volume, has good power. Like, there's just not a lot of holes to his game that we've seen up until this point. And for Paul Craig, I like his grappling a lot. I just don't love his wrestling, and I don't know if pulling guard against a guy like Jamal Hill is going to be good enough to beat him.
Yeah, I mean, you look at it for Jamal Hill, a little tricky to try and figure out which gym he's from, but it's Black Lion Jiu-Jitsu. He's the main training partner of Brett Martin. Yes, that heavyweight prospect that will soon, hopefully, knock wood, end up in the UFC. So, again, Brett Martin's on a heater right now, and so is Jamal Hill. And, Matt, I mean, really, it's simple if you boil it down that way. Like, you have a look at the odds for this one. Paul Craig open a plus 250 or thereabout. Underdog, he's plus 255 right now. Jamal Hill open a minus 300, minus 296. So, I mean, the odds kind of moving and shaking. 1,048 total votes on Topology, 78% Hill, 87% by knockout. For the 22% that have Craig, 68% by submission. But listen, this is one of those videos that I could go in depth and I could talk about who Jamal Hill's parents are and what they did for work, like I did with Luigi Vendramini to make it fun, or I can say, hey, these guys are absolutely polar opposites in terms of style, and one of two things is going to happen. And I really do see it that way. Sometimes Paul Craig gets a little too happy with his hands. It doesn't happen often, though, so that should be said. I mean, it did happen in the one fight against Menafield. No losses, too. Menafield, Crute, Roundtree, Pedro, one time. Future. Beat Magomed Ankalaev in the final seconds. Beat the biggest guy in the division in Kennedy and Nzechukwu. But yeah, I like Jamal Hill in this fight quite a bit. Paul Craig makes it interesting. He makes it interesting. But yeah, I've got Hill in this fight.
I think Jamal Hill has pretty high ceiling in this division. I think he's one of the better prospects at 205. And for all those reasons, I do like him quite a bit over top of Paul Craig. Paul Craig's an exciting fighter sometimes. Like, he's going to go out there and try really hard. That's the best thing I can say about Paul Craig. I just don't think that's going to be enough against Jamal Hill, who I really do see being the future of this division one day.
Matt, both of us going with sweet dreams are made of these. Jamal Hill to get the win. Really looking forward to the fight and the rest of our main card. We get some great ones happening. 5-round fight between Edwards and Diaz. 5-round fight for the title at 125. And will they need 5 rounds between Vettori and Adesanya? We're going to find out, but great fights. You're going to want to keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. As we always say, let's get into it. Big time fight coming up this weekend at welterweight. We have the former title challenger, 170-185, in Demian Maia. And listen, does the cowboy ride on after this fight? Because this is, of course, Demian Maia's last fight on his contract. He's almost 44 years old. He's taken on, remember the name, Bilal Muhammad. And Matt, for the bully, 18-3 so far in his interesting career. I mean, a guy that spent some time with Bellator. He's won more than he's lost with the UFC. And his last time, it was a main event on incredibly short notice where he was coming off a win over Diego Lima. He took on Leon Rocky Edwards. Rocky had his way with it until that errant eye poke, and then another one, and then that ended the fight. It was really gross. Since then, Bilal Muhammad, he's ended up on the desk with Alan Jouban and Karen Bryant. A little bit awkward because they had a fight of the night together, but in this fight, it is very interesting. Bilal Muhammad, is he a striker after his last fight? And for Demian Maia, as is customary with all Demian Maia fights, I have to read you straight from the record books. He is tied for 5th most UFC appearances at 32. His overall record in the UFC, 22-10. Again, title challenges against Anderson Silva, one against a really, really tough out his last time out in your champion. 2, and listen, 2nd in wins with 22, like I said. Tied for 8th in finishes with 12. 2nd most submission wins at 11. 4th in cage time, 6 hours, 34 minutes, and 40 seconds. And 2nd in control time, 2 hours, 31 minutes, and 6 seconds. This guy's been there and done that. It's a really tough fight. I know, listen, it's not all that long ago that he knocked out Ben Askren just like Jake Paul did. Or, sorry, he submitted him. And then he got knocked out by Gilbert Burns the last time out over a year ago. So, long time off for Demian Maia coming out of Demian Maia's jiu-jitsu. He's taken on Valley Flow Striking Systems and Rufus Sports, Bilal Muhammad. What do you have here? Because I know you love these guys.
It's a really interesting fight because for Bilal Muhammad, there's 2 versions of him. Like you had said, he does have that kind of wrestling-heavy version of him, like we saw against Chance Rencounter, for instance. Or he does have the more striking-focused aspect of his game. Now, he can't take down Demian Maia. Not that he can't. He shouldn't. He can. I'm sure he's more than able to. It's just not a good idea because Demian Maia to this day, even almost at 44 years of age, which is wild to say, like this guy's 43 and still competing in the top 15 of the welterweight division. But even at 43, like this is a guy you don't really want to be grappling with Now, with Bilal Muhammad, it'll be interesting. I think he's a fighter who does really rely on his wrestling to open up his striking, but the fact that Demian Maia gets rid of basically that half of your game, it's going to make Bilal Muhammad strike for the whole 15 minutes. Now, I think Bilal Muhammad is a much better striker than Demian Maia, don't get me wrong. The one X factor, though, is Bilal Muhammad can get clipped and he can go down. Like, we've seen him not only get knocked out, but drop multiple times before. It's not like Demian Maia is a crippling puncher by any means. He doesn't have great power by any means, but he's got an okay straight left. And if he does land it, I do think he could at least wobble Muhammad to the point where Maia might be able to secure the takedown. But other than that extremely specific sequence of events, I don't know how Demian Maia wins this fight.
So if you go back and you have a look at Demian Maia's 5-on-in, there's the loss to Kamaru Usman 3 years ago. He beats Lyman Good by sub. He beats Rocco Martin by majority decision. He beats Ben Askren by submission in a main event that they buried in Singapore. And then you have that loss to Gilbert Burns where that was kind of gross to watch. Like, it just kind of hurt your soul a little bit. Again, for Bilal Muhammad, he was on an absolute heater coming into that fight against Edwards. Win over Curtis Millender, PFL zone. Finish win over Takashi Sato. A big win over Lyman Good. It was a weird one. And then he beats Diego Lima. And he looked like a great striker in that fight. Credit where credit's due. So, ultimately, it comes down to game planning. Demian Maia is going to strike to get it to the mat to try and finish you. Bilal Muhammad can do it some different ways. He's also 11 years younger, so we'll see how that plays effect into this one. Again, I expect Valley Flow Striking Systems to have a good game plan in plan for Bilal, who's had some time to get ready for this fight. For Demian Maia, it's been over a year. It's a swan song. You want a good performance to cap off your UFC career.
He does. I just don't think this is the opponent that he's going to be able to do it against. When you look at the counter wrestling and the offensive wrestling of Bilal Muhammad, he's the one who's going to be able to dictate where this fight takes place. And honestly, if you don't think Bilal Muhammad's that good of a striker, you haven't been paying attention recently, because he really has made massive improvements in his striking. And I do see it going by way of Bilal Muhammad. Unless he TKOs Demian Maia, like due to exhaustion in between rounds, I see this being an easy decision win for Muhammad.
So we have a look at the odds. Muhammad opened a -220 favorite. He's a -241 right now. For Demian Maia, open a +185. He's now at a +192. And if we have a look at Tapology, it's a surprise to us as it is to you. 1,056 total votes, 71% Muhammad, like you said, 78% by decision. The 29% that have Maia, 74% by submission. So let us know down below in the comments section who you have winning. Is it going to be the ultimate legend, the former two-time title challenger, Demian Maia? He's a Hall of Famer in my book, but maybe not the UFC's book, taking on Bilal Muhammad. Matt, both of us going with, remember the name, Bilal Muhammad. Absolutely love the fight. Okay. Great main card coming up. You're not going to want to miss any of those videos. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, we always say. Let's get into it. Father's Day is coming, and weather's catching heat, Matt. We are in the middle of a ridiculous heat wave in Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada, with temperatures reaching over 40 degrees Celsius. With the Humidex, it's hot AF. My balls are sweaty. And Matt, if you've got sweaty balls, Manscaped is there for you. And whether you also have a dad bod or rocking a six-pack, make sure you and your dad are smelling nice and shaved where it matters most. Matt, you want to make your dad, my dad, proud this year? Get him and yourself the Manscaped Lawnmower 4.0 and the Refined Cologne by Manscaped. The brand new Lawnmower 4.0 and the Refined Cologne. It's perfect for you and the dad in your life to complete your grooming game. Get 20% off and free shipping with code FNP at manscaped.com. Now, Matt, listen, dads smell bad sometimes, and the Refined Cologne is that perfect additive. Now, I'm going to say, with the Refined Cologne, I've been a cologne guy since late high school. Maybe it's a little bit weird. Maybe it's a little bit suave. I don't know. But listen, I was never into those body sprays. They were always too much. So I've always been just one spritz, you're good to go. If I were to go with the Manscaped Refined Cologne, it's one of those ones where it's a little fancy. You want to spritz it into the air. You want to walk into it. You're going to feel nice. You're going to smell nice all day. And listen, we've known a lot about Manscaped since we've been on board with them. What, we're 4 or 5 months into it now? It's been a minute. And they just released the Lawnmower 4.0. It is like a spaceship. Now, the last time I was on here, I had it for what, a day, if that? I just got it out of the mail. Had a chance to kind of play around with it a little bit in the studio, but that was about it. So, you have that LED that you know. You have the grooming guards that, from experience now, they work pretty well. The other nice thing about the Lawnmower 4.0, if you're somebody that travels a lot, it has a travel lock. All you have to do is hit that 3 times. 1, 2, 3. It's going to light up. 1, 2, 3. You can't start that sucker. It's not going to start in your luggage. You're good to go. You want to turn it back on, tap it 3 times, And there you go, just like that. So it works really well. It's got a sleek charging stand that you know and love from before, but this one's actually even sleeker if they could manage that. So all sorts of great stuff from Manscaped. Listen, if your dad travels a lot, it's going to work well for you. If your dad stinks, this is going to work good for you. And after you guys have clean balls, yourself, your dad, your friend, whoever it is, clean up the cologne game. Grab that refined cologne. Like I said, it is the nice scent that you recognize already from Manscaped. And whether it's a gift for you, your dad, or the men in your life, choose Manscaped. Get 20% off and free shipping with our code FNP at manscaped.com. Your balls will thank you. That's 20% off and free shipping at manscaped.com. Use code FNP. Don't forget that you came from your dad's balls. This year, show your original home some love with Manscaped. They wrote that, not me. Without further ado, as we always say, let's get into it. Big time card coming up this weekend, UFC 263, and not in our main event, not in our co-main event, but still a 5-rounder. We have the featured fight at welterweight between Rocky Leon Edwards and Nate Diaz. And for Leon Edwards, this is a guy that just couldn't get a fight. His life did depend on it, and he couldn't get a fight. Everything kept falling through. And ultimately, after years away from the cage, after a huge win over Rafael dos Anjos, he ends up with Belal Muhammad. Now, again, we'll talk about the circumstances around it, but what do we know about Leon Edwards? Great boxing. All of a sudden, oh, you're a wrestler, grappler now? And then he comes out in his last fight against Muhammad, and he looked like a karate star. His kicks were absolutely on point. His eye pokes were absolutely on point and very pointy, and they ended the fight due to a no contest. Now, for Edwards, this is a guy that's been up around the top 5 of the division for the longest time. He was ranked, 3rd when the UFC stripped him out of the rankings, and then he ended up back in the good graces. And again, that fight against Muhammad, still considered a no contest, but he was running away with it. Just like Mason Jones last weekend against Alan Patrick, running away with it, illegal eye poke. That's what happened in the Muhammad fight. So, you end up with a Leon Edwards that's great at boxing. He's really incorporated his grappling, his jiu-jitsu over at Team Renegade BJJ with his brother Fabian. Aiden Lee's over there. Tom Breeze, all sorts of big names. Now he's taking on Nate Diaz. What the hell's Nate Diaz good at? Boxing, jiu-jitsu. This, on paper, maybe if this fight happened 10 years ago, would have been an interesting fight or an interesting case, or if Nate Diaz was 10 years younger. But now it's just an odd spot because for Diaz, he lost his last fight against a really good fighter and the man who's on the front of this Panini box in Jorge Masvidal. And it was one where, could Diaz have continued and was the scar tissue too much? We'll argue about that till the cows come home, and I know Nate Diaz will, and by extension Nick will. But it didn't look all that great. But before that, he looked really good in the return against Anthony Pettis. So it is difficult, but in a spot like this, just a tricky fight.
Chael Sonnen has a saying, and it's you want to take the easiest fight for the most amount of money. Leon Edwards figured it out. Leon Edwards has done it. Every UFC fighter ever has wanted the easiest fight possible with the most attention possible. Leon Edwards has just signed and done that. You're fighting Nate Diaz, who, he looked all right against Anthony Pettis, but even Pettis at that point in his career, it's not like Anthony Pettis was at the stage that Leon Edwards is at right now. You have Leon Edwards, great at throwing leg kicks, great at keeping distance, great at counter wrestling, really good everywhere. He's just a great, well-rounded fighter. This is a terrible fight for Nate Diaz. It just is. And I understand the UFC is trying to do him favors. It's a 5-round fight. I'm sure that helps Nate Diaz more than this being a 3-round fight. But the deck is stacked against him. Listen, the Belal Muhammad fight, you can't really take anything from that fight and say, wow, Nate Diaz is going to have some success like Belal Muhammad did, because if you look at that fight, Belal Muhammad's normally pretty good at moving forward, and he's the one who pressures his opponent. Well, Leon Edwards is the one who had him on the retreat throughout the majority of that fight. And although Nate Diaz is known for that forward pressure, I see him walking into a ton of just straight lefts throughout the night. And Leon Edwards has phenomenal leg kicks, too. Nate Diaz is a guy who has always struggled with those. I really think every single box that Leon Edwards checks, Nate Diaz doesn't check in that category. All of Leon Edwards' strengths play into the weaknesses of Nate Diaz. And for all those reasons, I just don't know how Nate Diaz is going to win this fight.
And I mean, let's focus on some Nate Diaz wins. So you look at the fight against Anthony Pettis, which again, not that long ago. It was back in 2019, and he ended up winning unanimous decision. All of the judges scored at 30-27 Diaz. But Pettis has always struggled against pressure boxers. You saw that in Pettis' PFL debut against Clay Collard. It was a huge issue. So, good win for Diaz, 100%. I mean, he had taken, 3 years off, almost on the dot since the last McGregor fight. Let's go back to the first McGregor fight. what's Nate Diaz great at? Again, we talked about it, the grappling and the jiu-jitsu. And ultimately, his cardio is always on point. That was such a short notice fight at 196. It was originally supposed to be Dos Anjos, a little bit of a connection there with Edwards. But for Diaz, outlast the striking, work in the grappling and the wrestling, put them tangs on him, weighing 40 pounds more, and able to get the win there. But those things don't work well against Leon Edwards. And again, you can talk about it for Leon Edwards. Who was his last loss? What was the champ in 2015? He lost to Claudio Silva back in 2014 when Silva was this bugaboo Brazilian that could submit anybody. But if you go back and look at that one, it was a split decision loss. So for Leon Edwards, it is really tough. And the other thing with Edwards, I mean, let's talk about the win streak. Dominic Waters, no longer in the UFC. Albert Tumanov, gone too soon from the UFC. Vicente Luque, Brian Barberena, Peter Sabata, good striker. Cowboy Cerrone, Gunnar Nelson by split. But again, Leon looked really good and out-grappled the grappler and outstruck the karate master. And then he beat Rafael Dos Anjos, being a much bigger fighter. He was supposed to get the main event over in London back early last year against Tyron Woodley. That would have been a big fight. That was before Woodley was way over the hump, losing a lot of fights before he was supposed to take on Jake Paul. Then it was Chimaev, and then Diaz. Diaz, minor injury out of their fight that was supposed to take place last month. So now we get this fight at 5 rounds. Again, the reason being because, yeah, you'd have to think that would favor Nate Diaz. He's going to like that. Do we see Nick in his corner? Who knows? I'd like to see it, but the Perez connection, they don't really get along so much, so maybe we won't. But it is ultimately an interesting fight. But if you have a look at the odds, Edwards open to minus 275. Tip of my hand. Wish I got him there. He's minus 550 right now. Diaz, a plus 220 at open. He's a plus 396. And if we have a look at Topology, 1,061 total fans, 86% Edwards, 14% Diaz. Matt, who you got here?
I think it's pretty obvious. Like, Leon Edwards, I think, is going to be challenging Kamaru Usman soon for the title, and I think he's going to do well in that fight. I don't think he's going to beat Kamaru Usman. Like, I think Usman's going to go down as one of the GOATs, probably. But I do think he's closer to Usman than he is to Nate Diaz at this stage of his career. And for Nate, this is a big opportunity. Everyone likes watching Diaz fight. Just this ain't it. Like, Leon Edwards is a bad matchup for him.
7-year age difference. My favorite Nate Diaz fight, if you want to go back and watch it, the fight against Marcus Davis, where he beat the absolute bejesus out of him. But Matt, both of us going ultimately with Leon Rocky Edwards to get the win. If that upset you, let us know in the comments section. Are you a big Diaz fan? And if you've got him, show some support down there. We got 2 big fights, 4 titles, both rematches. Figueiredo, Moreno. You got Adesanya taking on Vettori. You're not going to want to miss those. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. Big time fight coming up this weekend in our co-main event for Flyweight Gold. This division's back. Flyweight never die. We have Deus da Guerra, Deiveson Figueiredo taking on the assassin baby Brandon Moreno. And Matt, we might have caught some fans off guard when we went on the What Happens Here podcast with our big time guy,
Marcus Deegan.
And Matt from Marcus A Shouts. Great guy, and it was so much fun to go over there. But I think we scared a lot of people, and I think you scared a lot of people by the question that you asked Brandon Moreno.
I have another question that has nothing to do with fighting. It's just because I need to know for my own sake. How long does it take to build a piñata from scratch, start to finish?
How dare you? Man, you need to talk with my parents. I was very bad making piñatas. Bad, you know? All my family are very good, you know. It's a family company, you know. But yeah, I was very bad. Normally, for example, my brother usually take, my 10 minutes, 20 minutes to make one. But for me, it was like
quick.
fucking 30 minutes and build something. That's why I'm fighting right now.
But straight up, Matt, I mean, really appreciate Marcus having us on, and Matt, Ultimate Food Champion over there on Instagram. But it was a lot of fun. Who would have thought, like, how crazy is it? From 2018 to starting Fight Night Picks, we're talking right into a computer with a podcast. And now we're talking to Brandon Moreno, a guy that had just come off a crazy fight, a huge Lego fan, a former piñata maker, unsuccessfully. But Brandon Moreno is one of the most interesting cases in UFC history because he had so much success, then lost a fight, and it was like, see you later. And then he comes back in off a win and lights the division on fire. It's insane.
He was one of those unfortunate casualties from, I don't know what we're going to call that time period in the flyweight division, like the great cutting. Whatever you guys want, whatever term you guys want to make up for it, go for it. But Brandon Moreno was unfortunately just one of those guys. Oh, you lost? Well, you're on your way out. Now, luckily, the UFC figured it out and they kept the division. DJ left, Cejudo. Everyone knows the story. But it's kind of crazy to see just how far the flyweight division has come since Brandon Moreno's first run in the division and from his time on The Ultimate Fighter. Because you have to remember, this is the guy who fought in the same season of The Ultimate Fighter as Tim Elliott. When Tim Elliott fought Demetrius Johnson, like that was years and years ago. But Brandon Moreno, I would say, is probably been the most successful fighter from that season, even though he only fought once and lost on the season against Alejandro Pantoja. So the fact that Moreno has been able to improve so much throughout his career is really impressive. The thing, though, that I do worry in this fight is that Brandon Moreno, I thought he would have success by switching it up in their first fight. I thought the ways Moreno would have success was not only by his volume, but his ability to shoot the takedown, and his ability to scramble, his ability to just make Figueiredo work. We saw that, and Figueiredo still didn't get tired in that fight. That was the one thing about that first fight that I don't think people remember. Like, the one thing that I held on to hope for Brandon Moreno to win that fight was, okay, if he can not get finished until like the second round, maybe he can win round 3, 4, and 5. The issue was, though, he might have even done better as the fight gone on, but Figueiredo wasn't exhausted by the end of the fight. Like, Figueiredo still was throwing output in that 4th and 5th round, and he still had a lot of pop on his shots near the end of that fight.
And if you do look at it, and I'm not a big countdown guy, but I did watch the countdown for this week, and it was interesting because both of these guys had fought relatively at the same time. I mean, you had Moreno, who beat Brandon Royval. Obviously unfortunate the injury, and you wish nothing but the best for Royval, who, from all accounts, is getting back to octagon ready. And Figueiredo had just successfully defended his belt against Team Oyama's Alex Perez in impressive fashion. So they said, no, we're keeping this guy in the States. It was like a big play, but we're keeping Deiveson Figueiredo. He can't go to Brazil. He's got to stay here. And for Moreno, a guy that trains at a Tijuana, but had talked about buying a house in Vegas. He was sticking around in Vegas. His manager's Jason House. And ultimately, his coach, his manager, everybody kind of figured, if we can withstand just a first-round storm, we should be able to win. And that wasn't really the case.
It was a lot more complicated than that. And Brandon Moreno did have success in that first fight. And it was only a draw, though, because Figueiredo lost a point. Like, that's the thing people have to remember. Figueiredo won the fight 3 rounds to 2.
Now, it was weird because there was 1 nut shot, and then there was 2 nut shot, and 2 nut shot, like, you could probably hear it down the block. Like, it was bad, and I know Figueiredo said that Moreno milked it, and if you're Moreno and you get kicked in the nuts or the cup, A, it's going to hurt, but B, you might milk it if it's a title fight, and I don't hold that against him.
He also got hit in the nuts by one of the hardest punchers pound for pound in the UFC. What is there to discuss right now? What are we talking about? Deiveson Figueiredo kicked Brandon Moreno in between the legs. You felt that pain before, and you've never been hit by someone who hits as hard as Deiveson Figueiredo. I'm sorry, but whatever you just said for the last 30 seconds, disregard. Brandon Moreno got hit in the nuts, and I'm sure it hurt him really bad.
And Matt's a idiot and doesn't know what he's talking about. In this case, it's the fact that if you watch any of the promos, they're selling the fact that the nut shot made a big difference. Now, it did in terms of, hey, we lost a point. And for Deiveson Figueiredo, that was huge. That was the difference between winning and drawing in the fight, not necessarily losing. So we come into the second fight where Figueiredo, and we talked about it beforehand, where Deiveson Figueiredo's not just invested in himself, but the people around him. And I know that if you watch any of the pre-fight tape, you see old Priscilla Cachoeira, old zombie girl, who's on a win streak, by the way, at 125 pounds. Not just a win streak, a 2-fight finish streak. And for Deiveson Figueiredo, investing in the people, investing in the camp. We've seen this out of a lot of big fighters. GSP was a huge proponent of that when he was at TriStar, but not just TriStar, moving around, training with some of the best in the world. If it was Freddie Roach or John Danaher or whoever it was, we've seen another fighter do this recently, and it has paid off in spades in Charles Oliveira. And it's not just a Brazilian connection, but you saw it with the pre-fight for him against Michael Chandler. I've invested in the people. I've invested in myself. Both of those guys ultimately incredibly successful with not just title bids, but then we're going from title bid to now booking fights where we're looking to defend against top quality opponents. Figueiredo, I would say, defended against Moreno, even though it's just a draw, so he gets to hold on. And I don't know what Deiveson Figueiredo is going to do in this division, because he's 33. Is it going to be a Woodley situation, because he had a draw early on against Wonder Boy, then he was able to win some more, and then, you know how the story goes. Figueiredo's only loss is to a guy that's not in the UFC anymore that was really good for a long time in GCA Formiga. Brandon Moreno, absolute heater since he's been back with the UFC. A draw against Askar Askarov, you be the judge, it's tricky. And the draw against Figueiredo. But when it comes down to this fight, do you see it playing out any differently than the first fight?
I do think this fight will be fight of the night. Like, I really do. I don't think you can put these two guys together and it be a boring fight. Like, Francis and Derek Lewis, they said that, but you knew there was always, like, a little smidge that, okay, these guys are both power punchers, maybe they're hesitant. These guys are going to deliver. At the end of the day, I've got to pick Deiveson Figueiredo, though. I just like what I saw from him in the first fight, and if he did avoid that nut shot, we probably wouldn't even be having this discussion right now about the immediate rematch. I love watching Brandon Moreno fight. One of the most entertaining fighters in the UFC, pound for pound wise. I just don't think his entertainment value is going to be enough to get him over the hump and turn him into a championship fighter. I think Brandon Moreno is going to be in the top 5 for a very long time. He's going to be around the UFC having entertaining fights for a long time. I just don't think he's got the style to beat Deiveson.
I mean, Matt, big Brandon Moreno fan. That's going to kill you a little bit. That's a big tough one. But for Figueiredo, open to minus 275 favorite. He's a minus 240 right now. For Moreno, open to plus 205, he's a plus 192 right now over on Topology. 1,099 total votes, 77% Figueiredo, 50% by decision, 34% by knockout. For the 23% that I'm Moreno, 59% by decision. I know they talk about it again in that same countdown that I referenced earlier. Moreno saying, hey, I ate his best shots. I might not get finished. And that's true. But we did learn that Figueiredo is not just a 1 round, 2 round, 2.5 round type of guy. He has that staying power late. Now, did Moreno have opportunities round 4, round 5? He did. But again, Figueiredo wasn't washed. He wasn't tired. Over the hill, if you will. So yeah, I gotta go with the Brazilian. I gotta go with the Ant still in this fight. But I absolutely love it. It's a great one.
Fred VanVleet says bet on yourself a lot. And that's what Deiveson Figueiredo did with his camp and with all of his new resources. Like, that's my favorite thing about Figueiredo. He was already a great fighter who then went on to get better. Like, you don't see that often. You see fighters get to a certain level, then they kind of plateau. Think of Luke Rockhold, for instance. Like, Luke Rockhold got to a UFC title shot and was Strikeforce middleweight champ by throwing a really good check right hook, left straight, some kicks, and being good at jiu-jitsu. Now, yes, that's quite a few things, but he was very basic, and he was able to go really far with that. But you saw that at a certain point, he was just kind of complacent with his, I don't know if it was training, you be the judge of it, but he never really progressed after a certain point. Deiveson Figueiredo, I still think is getting better, even though he has become champ, and I really couldn't say enough good things about him because of that.
Just as long as nobody's moving around in the gym with Brendan Schaub's podcast partner, you should be good.
And the last thing I will say is, only because Figueiredo fight, the weight cut always does concern me about Figueiredo. It's not that I'm going to switch my pick or anything, but by the time question mark kicks does roll around, I might have a different opinion on this fight.
So Matt, both of us going with Deiveson Figueiredo, but like you said, make sure you check out question mark kicks. It's 2 hours before the prelims. The thumbnail and everything goes up the day before or the day of, because it's always tricky. You never know if you lose fights. They change the start time for those prelims. Make sure you check out the rest of our content coming out this week, because listen, I don't have $1,500, but I had about 90. So I did get a blaster box, the UFC Panini Prism cards. Make sure you check out some of that special content that we have coming out later on in the week. We got a big main event. You're not going to want to miss that. So keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, we always say. Let's get into it. UFC 263 coming up this Saturday from the Gila River Arena in Glendale, Arizona. As always, one half of your hosting duo, Craig Allen. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Craig Allen FNP. Always with me to my left, to your right, at Matt Allen FNP over on the respective socials. Not his name, it's Matt. Everybody asks, are we brothers? That's right. Now, Matt, we have quite a few rematches on this card. Eric Anders, Darren Stewart. In the co-main event, you have Deiveson Figueiredo, Brandon Moreno. In the main event, Marvin Vettori, Israel Adesanya. For Marvin Vettori, came into the UFC back in 2016. For Adesanya, back in 2018. You know the rest of the story for Adesanya. Tasted defeat in his last fight. Up trying to become a 2-division champ against Jan Blachowicz. And it's weird to me because the conversation was, it was always the move to 205. I always wanted to become champ. Maybe I move up to 265. I fight John Jones. And now the conversation's a little bit more subdued. You know, was there a little bit of pressure to go to 205? Never really wanted to go to 205. It's interesting to hear the rumblings around this fight. For Marvin Vettori, well, the guy's cried foul since he lost the first fight, which also happened to be at the Gila River Arena a few years ago. The main event of that card, Dustin Poirier and Justin Gaethje. Great fight. But when it comes into this one, I had the chance to listen to the Submission Radio interview from earlier on in the week with City Kickboxing's own Eugene Behrman. A lot of interesting tidbits about this fight, but it's really disappointing and really unfortunate, I should say. The unfortunate passing of a teammate in Fauvac who was unfortunately murdered not that long ago. And he said it's really been tough for some of the fighters to process it and to try and grieve ahead of this fight. Guys taking a couple days, maybe a week out of the training to get ready. So we just want to send our condolences to the family and the friends of the fallen fighter there. It was definitely unfortunate news the last couple of weeks. And I hate to start being a Debbie Downer that way, but we do have 2 city kickboxing fighters on this card, Brad Riddell, Israel Adesanya. For Adesanya, again, it's unfortunate the last time he went out, and I really don't like it when fighters kind of talk about it. Well, you know, I was taken down, and it was a lot of hugging. It wasn't a lot of advancing position. It wasn't a lot of offense. It was just stalling. And he talked about that in the Blachowicz fight, and he talked about that, if you watch the countdown, rewatching the 3rd round against Vettori. And while it may have been a lot of positionally safe maneuvers by Blachowicz and Vettori, it's just a little disappointing to hear that. You know, you can sit there from your seat and say, come on, you got to do something against it. But ultimately, he beats Vettori, he loses to Blachowicz, and now we're here at 185 pounds.
I'm going to push back on that a little bit. I think you do have... I think you're right when you're talking about the Blachowicz fight. I do think Blachowicz did enough on top where, listen, there's no way he was going to get stood up. But in the Vettori fight, like, Vettori did just kind of lay on him.
Yep.
Vettori didn't do a whole lot offensively. And the fact that Adesanya was able to get back up to his feet is really... That's the big thing. Like, at the end of round 4 and at the end of round 5 against Blachowicz, Adesanya wasn't the one who was like, okay, I'm going to now get my underhook, get back up to the feet. The round ended, and that's how he got back up to his feet. At least in the Marvin fight, he was at his feet before the end of the round. And that is really important because Israel Adesanya, I think, could get taken down by Marvin Vettori and get back up to his feet. I don't think he had that luxury against Jan Blachowicz because, Jan Blachowicz is that guy. I think we got to start showing him a little bit of respect. But also, like, Jan Blachowicz is a legit black belt. You don't go from submitting Nikita Krylov to then not being able to control Israel Adesanya on the ground. So I do think Adesanya has a little bit of a claim that Vettori was using a little bit of stalling, but I do agree with you. It is a little bit disappointing hearing him use those terms, but I'm going to flip it over to Marvin Vettori. I hate that he thinks he won that first fight. I don't like that whatsoever. Listen, Brandon Moreno going into his next fight against Deiveson Figueiredo doesn't say, hey, I thought I beat him. Like, I definitely beat him. I'm crying foul constantly. He was like, listen, it was a really close fight. Could have gone either way, but I'm going to get him next time. I love that mindset because Brandon Moreno's like, listen, I was that close to being able to beat him. If I work a little bit harder every single day and put in that little bit extra time, then maybe I can get to that level. Marvin Vettori's like, okay, I already fought him to a split decision. Yeah, he's got better, but I know I've gotten a lot better. And I'm not going to accuse Marvin Vettori of not being a hard worker, because if he is anything, he is a hard worker. You see this man in the gym. And this is the cool thing about Marvin Vettori, too. People like to get really excited when they see, like, Conor McGregor put out training footage, or just these different fighters. I don't care which countdown show it is. When they're at King's MMA, Marvin Vettori is included in that shot. Because Marvin Vettori is in shape year-round, and that's really important. He's not a guy who treats fighting like it is a part-time job. He's someone who, when he's not in camp, he's still trying to get better. And I think that's really important, because when we talked about, I guess even in the last one with Figueiredo, how he is continuing to improve, even though he became champ, like, that's important. You have to keep on getting better. And again, I'm going to reference Chael Sonnen. He said the reason Randy Couture was able to fight so late into his 40s is because Randy Couture would go to, I forget which university it was, but he would go train with the young guys. He would always make sure there were young guys around, because those are the guys who are going to bring new things to your sport. If you're constantly training with people younger than you, then you're going to learn those new wrinkles too. You won't age out like the other legends of your division or your sport. And that's why Randy Couture was able to stay around so long. Marvin Vettori, I think, will have Marvin Vettori should also have an equal level of longevity, especially in this sport, and that's what this fight comes down to for me. I think Marvin Vettori can become UFC champion at some point during his UFC tenure. I just don't know if it's going to be right now, and it's weird because Adesanya's not old by any means, and I don't really look at this division like it's an old division. It's definitely not one of the younger ones in the UFC, but when you look around, Marvin Vettori's 27, and a lot of the guys in the top 15 right now are in that 30 to 35 range, and I do think that it could just be a matter of time until Marvin Vettori kind of ages those other guys out of the division, and sooner rather than later, he could become champ. Now, he's going to have to go through Paulo Costa, Robert Whittaker, Adesanya, like, there's
Jared Cannonier.
Jared Cannonier's not an easy fight either. Like, there's some really good fighters out there at 185 pounds, and you've got to be phenomenal to get the title. I'm just saying that there is a situation where even if Vettori gets completely outclassed on Saturday, Saturday. I do think that he can just keep on working, and let's say in another 3 years he gets another title shot. I don't know how much he's been improved in the last 3 years since they fought. Can you imagine if he's been able to improve that same level during the next 3 years? We could be dealing with a completely different fighter.
When you look at Marvin Vettori coming into the UFC, fought for Venator, who hosted such fights as well. They were supposed to have Mayhem Miller, but he weighed in, like a weight class higher. They had Paul Harris, who's smart Paul Harris, taking on Emil Weber-Mech at the time. But you do look at it, for Marvin Vettori, kind of had the same game. I mean, southpaw, pumps the jab, works the takedown, really powerful. But he's added wrinkles and he's gotten better. And I mean, to me, what fight do you want to pick off as a real coming out party? I mean, his UFC debut, he beat Alberto Uda. That was a good win. UFC 202, Diaz McGregor 2. That was pretty good. Lost to Shoeface, beat Vitor Miranda, draw against Omari Akhmedov, which is nice to have in 2017, and I think it ages well. Lost to Adesanya by split decision, beats Mutante Cesar Fajea. He beats Andrew Sanchez and beats him quite badly. Finishes Carl Roberson in the weird, we hate each other, we fought in the hotel, don't take my ciabatta. And I'm not saying that as a stereotype. That was an actual thing. That
was the Kevin Holland ciabatta.
Alright, so it was Kevin Holland. I've mixed my references, but he didn't like Carl Roberson, and Carl did something cool. He did a flip off the cage in that fight, but Vettori looked great. Here's the point I want to make with Marvin Vettori. The Marvin that fought in 2020, it's wow, this guy's really on another level. He beat Carl Roberson badly. He beat Jack Hermanson badly. He beat Kevin Holland badly. And I've seen it out there in the comments section this week. I threw it out there in the community tab to get a pulse on what people were thinking on this fight. There's a lot of people on Israel Adesanya's train. And there were a lot of people that said Kevin Holland, when he had the opportunity, way outstruck Marvin Vettori. He did have pockets of success, but the large majority of that fight was big mouth on his back with Vettori on top. Not just stalling position. If it was even from a guard, he was really landing down a lot of blows. And Kevin Holland's one of those guys that once he gets on bottom, he accepts the guard, he locks his feet, and he just tries to hold on for a stand-up. He has a hard time getting to his feet. And listen, give him credit. He's at AKA right now, training with Deron Wynn. Hopefully his wrestling defense gets better. But in that fight, it was all Vettori. And I know it was short notice. It was supposed to be Vettori Till. But still, Vettori looked great, tuning him up, getting ready for this fight. It makes things even more interesting.
It does. Now, I will give Kevin Holland a little bit of credit for that performance, because there was one point in the 5th round where he hit Vettori with a few clean shots in a row. It's not like Vettori was, rocked to the point where he couldn't continue, but he definitely got stunned from them. And if Kevin Holland can stun you in the 5th round, then I do worry about what Israel Adesanya is going to be able to do to you in the 5th round, because this is the problem I have with Marvin Vettori. I like a lot about his game. I really do. I can't say enough good things about Marvin Vettori. He is hittable, though. And that worries me. Robert Whittaker, I think, is actually a worse matchup for Marvin Vettori than Adesanya is, just because Whittaker, his whole game is, I'm going to defend all of your takedowns and try to knock you out, whereas Adesanya has to work a little bit more to defend the takedowns. I do think Adesanya's takedown defense, though, is good enough to beat Marvin Vettori, and that's what I keep on coming back to. Can Marvin Vettori damage Israel Adesanya enough in the bottom position to where Adesanya's a diminished version of himself? Maybe, but this is the thing about Adesanya. Maybe his wrestling and his jiu-jitsu is the weakest part of his game. He's still pretty good defensively, to where it's not like guys get a lot of ground and pound off on him.
The strange thing about Israel Adesanya, you might look at the run and you discount things and whatever. Let's look at it. Brad Tavares, what's he good at? He can power punch, but he can wrestle. Derek Brunson, hell of a wrestler. Kelvin Gastelum, great wrestler. Robert Whittaker, good MMA wrestler. Yoel Romero, one of the best to ever wrestle. Win. He beat all those fighters. However, it was a lot of those fights were contested in striking range and with a lot of strikes. You saw Brad Tavares strike with him. You saw him finish Derek Brunson early, and it was pretty much a striking contest. Kelvin Gastelum struck. Robert Whittaker struck. Yoel Romero struck. And it's really weird when you look at all those, and he beats a lot of good wrestlers, and you focus on Vettori, who's very well-rounded. Is he at the same level as some of these other fighters? I think we have to give him his flowers, because he's proven in his last, if not 3 fights, that he definitely is on that level. It's just a really tricky fight.
I have a question for you, and I just thought of it right now, but it's an honest one. Right now, today, is Marvin Vettori better than Derek Brunson, and has he proved it?
I think he is. I really do think he is.
Personally, because right now the way I look at this fight is, well, Derek Brunson does a lot of the things Marvin Vettori does. I think Derek Brunson has more power than Marvin Vettori, on the feet at least. I think Marvin Vettori is the better wrestler, at least has the better cardio with his grappling than Derek Brunson. But those fighters to me are kind of similar. I think Vettori's much more durable than Brunson, but just X's and O's wise, you can get a good read off each other's game. The thing that worries me going into this fight, though, for Vettori is that hitability factor. If he does go in there lunging for takedowns, because he does believe he can take down Adesanya easily, then I do think he's going to get caught sooner rather than later. Look at the Brunson fight. Derek Brunson, who is a very, very good wrestler, just look at his fight against Kevin Holland. He did the exact same thing to him as Marvin Vettori did. But Kevin Holland against Adesanya tried for takedowns. He really did. He just couldn't get them. Like, to the point where he was basically ripping off Adesanya's shorts. He was trying so hard to get the grip onto him. Adesanya, once he did realize the entries of Derek Brunson's takedowns, immediately hit him with a knee, and you could tell it was the beginning of the end from there. The second he rocked Derek Brunson, he basically put him away with like a 70-punch combo. It was very nice to watch. I think Marvin Vettori has the durability to where he won't get finished if he does get hit by one of those strikes, but I do think that after every one of those knees, they're going to add up. And if every time you're going for a takedown, you're being met by a big strike, I just think that by the third round, you're not going to be going for as many takedowns. And I do think Marvin Vettori has made improvements in his striking, but I don't think Marvin Vettori's at the level now to where, oh, I'm comfortable with him being in there striking with Israel Adesanya. Because Robert Whittaker is about as good as an MMA striker can get, and I mean, like, as good as a striker can get, pretty much, and Adesanya was able to knock him out.
Here's the X factor for me. So let's talk about the odds quick. Adesanya opened at minus 235. He's a minus 259 right now. Vittori opened a plus 200. He's a plus 207. And if we have a look at the Topology votes, surprise to me, it's surprise to you, it's surprise to you out there. They've obviously changed since, but 1,083 total votes, 80% Adesanya, 59% by knockout, 20% that have Vittori, 65% by decision. What does Marvin Vettori do well, and what has he accentuated? He's a good grappler. He's a good wrestler, and once he gets top position, it's hard to get him off of you unless the ref stands you up. It's really, really tough to get him off of you. I think he's improved enough to strike to clinch to takedown, and the one thing that he's a little bit too comfortable about is when he gets into the clinch, he'll hold position until he can get that right spot to work the takedown, but he can tire you out, and Adesanya has good cardio, and Marvin Vettori has good cardio. Vettori started to win out in the third round of their first fight, but now we're going back 3 years, so you have to give it a little bit of a grain of salt. But again, you said Adesanya started to get up. In the Blachowicz fight, though, fourth round, fifth round, it really started to go out the window. Whoever wins the first 2 rounds of this fight is probably going to win this fight. And I know that sounds really simple, because there's 5, and you got to win 3. But I like Vettori's chances in this fight for that fact, and if he gets us to the mat, it's going to be really tricky. Have we seen it? Adesanya knows, hey, I got to pop my right hip if he goes in for the left. He's tried to shore up those deficiencies that he had in the first fight, even just in the third round. But both guys have gotten a lot better. And so I do really appreciate the craft of Adesanya. But if it's me, and I'm sitting on the fence on a fight where I've got an underdog that's more than a 2-1, I go with the underdog in Vettori.
I think there might be some recency bias in that because of Israel Adesanya's last performance against Jan Blachowicz. Like, Jan Blachowicz is better than Marvin Vettori. He's a way better striker. He's far more technical, has much more power, and I think he's a better grappler, too. The fact that Adesanya lost to a bigger fighter who is world-class doesn't change my opinion of Adesanya at all. I still think he's a much better striker than Vettori. I think his cardio is going to be able to hold up, and that's the one thing about Vettori. He does have good cardio, but there's no point in a Marvin Vettori fight where his cardio is so good that you're like, what? I shouldn't say that. There's no point in his fights where his output is so high, I should say, that I'm like, wow, I'm that impressed with his cardio. Like, he's a really good, consistent fighter is what I'm really trying to say. He's not a guy like Max Holloway who's going to pick one round, like, okay, the fourth round is going to be hell, and then I'll kind of pace myself throughout the rest of this. For that reason, I think Marvin Vettori can stay competitive through some of these rounds, but I do think that Adesanya's going to have one big action every round until he does eventually finish Vettori. But I do think that this is going to be a very, very fun fight, and I don't like people saying that Vettori's only getting this fight because they had a first fight that was close. Marvin Vettori's on a legit 5-fight winning streak where not only has he shown the ability to strike with guys, to grapple with guys, to have really good cardio for 5 rounds. Like, Marvin Vettori has proven everything that he has to do to deserve this title shot. I just don't believe it's going to be enough to beat Adesanya.
Big time fight coming up this weekend. Can't wait for it. You've got Adesanya. I've got Marvin Vettori. If any of the picks change on this card, Matt, we have Fight Night Picks kicks on Saturday, 2 hours before the prelims. We lock, we load, and then you find out everything in the community tab after the fact. But hey, big weekend last weekend, 9-3, 7-5. It's unfortunate we had the no contest with Jones and Tom Breeze obviously out of his fight, but we got a great card coming up this weekend. 14 fights there, and apart from question mark kicks, we're going to have some neat content coming out later on in the week. I got this pack, or this box, I should say, a Panini Prism UFC cards. Now, hey, I'm not a rich man. People got to hit up the super chat if I'm ever going to become one, but we did grab these. We're going to do a content piece with those. I've got a top signature series as well, so we'll see what happens there. But all sorts of great stuff with Fight Night Picks. We get you covered for the fights coming up from Glendale, UFC 263. Keep locked in with Fight Night Picks, as we always say.
Let's get into it.